Really quick, before we jump into the story, I just wanted to say that this is the longest story I've ever narrated. I think it's close to 4 hours. It was originally 15 parts, but I thought it'd be easier to just put it all in one video for you all. So if at any point you feel that this video deserves a like, it would be very much appreciated. It did take me almost a full week to narrate and edit and put this whole entire video together. A huge thank you to GryphonAlastare for allowing me to narrate their story. Without further ado, let's get into cursed tapes and how to avoid them. And as always, I hope you all have a great night. I have a hardwood safe filled with cursed VHS tapes that are to never be watched by anyone. Ever. Only because I have watched them and have faced and or witnessed the consequences. This post is a warning for the following VHS tape known as Traveling Up the Pipeline. To my knowledge, there is only one copy known to exist. Just in case someone finds another one, read this. I will go over what is on the tape, how dangerous it is, and basic containment of said tape. But first, a quick lesson. There are 5 levels of danger when it comes to tapes. Level 1, safe. Can watch as many times as you like. Tapes like this typically change upon repeated viewings. Level 2, be cautious. Suggested not to watch. Tapes like this can have an effect on the mind or body. Length of time affected varies, but typically lasts no more than a month. Level 3, dangerous. Do not watch. Tapes like this will usually end in permanent damage to the mind, body, soul, or personal/public property. Level 4, extremely dangerous. Absolutely do not watch. Tapes like this have a high chance to kill the viewer and or destroy things around it. The tape in the ring is a good example. Level 5, contain or destroy. Watching will lead to more than just death. Tapes like this typically contain entities that will try to do as much damage as possible to whatever they can, and try to spread this chaos to everything. The name of the tape is called Traveling Up the Pipeline. It's a blank Sony tape with a title written in pen on the front, and it has no case. The runtime is 85 minutes. Keep it in a secure wooden box with no metal hinges. Metal amplifies whatever energy is contained on the tape. Finally, it has a danger level of 3. I acquired this tape from a hole-in-the-wall antique store that was packed floor to ceiling with things. The owner looked older than Jesus and seemed like he could drop at any moment, but he sold me the tape for $1, so I'm not complaining. I thought the tape was cursed based on title and feeling of weight. Cursed tapes tend to seem, or feel, heavier without actually being heavier. The weight of whatever that was captured or put on the tape can sometimes make it feel heavier. Also, if you feel a general uneasiness from looking or being near a tape, there's a good chance it's cursed. Anyway, I bought it and took it home. When watching potentially cursed VHS tapes, I always have a friend with me and a friend outside the room who checks in every 5 minutes by knocking. If we don't answer, he goes to the breaker and cuts the power. The tape itself starts off with a dirty and disheveled man wearing splunking gear. There is a timestamp in the bottom right corner from March 12th, 1993. The man speaks into the video camera, talking about how he has been stuck in whatever cave he's in for the past 3 days, and that he keeps hearing noises that don't sound human. There is also some sort of mount on the side of his helmet. The image then cuts to the mount, and the man is moving through the cave system. However, the system is anything but normal. The rock walls are slimy with splotches of pulsating purple patches that the man continuously comments about, saying he doesn't know what they are, but they don't seem harmful, and they are warm to the touch. There are also no stalactites or stalagmites in the cave, just a bunch of weird bumps. The man doesn't have a flashlight, but there are red crystals that have some sort of luminescence. There is suddenly a large moaning sound coming from behind the man as the whole cave shakes for a few seconds. The man's breathing becomes more frantic as he begins to pick up his pace in the cave. The video cuts to black for a second before the man is back in the frame, holding the camera. He lifts it up, showing that he's hiding behind a rock of some sort, before holding it over the rock and pointing at a couple bipedal creatures that are out of focus. It tries to focus, but it can't quite make it, giving only a brief glimpse of what the creatures look like. The best my friend and I could make out was a short humanoid with reversed knees, like an ostrich. No hair anywhere, large mouths with no lips, 2 small eyes, may have been nostrils, and stubby arms. There were 5 of them, and they were drinking from a small pool of yellowish liquid. The camera then cuts again to black before going to another shot of the man walking through the cave. The purple spots are a little more prevalent now on the walls, and the man speculates the creatures he saw earlier could have come from them somehow. Sometime later, after climbing up a steep incline, the man comes across a giant underground lake of that same yellowish liquid the creatures were drinking before. The liquid is bubbling this time, and the man comments on how it's very hot, and he thinks it's an underground hot spring. Suddenly, the entire cavern shakes and he slips into the edge of the lake. There's a loud sizzling sound as he struggles to get out of the liquid, but he makes it out and tries to wipe the liquid off of his pants. He manages to get dry enough for it to stop burning, but then realizes that the liquid has burned holes in his pants and gloves. The man takes a minute to sit on the shore, away from the water, possibly to think, but he does not state why. The camera pans over the lake, just in time to see a gigantic off-white serpent of some sort surface for a moment before it goes back underneath. The man utters the words, "What the fuck?" before he gets up and turns the camera off. After another second of black screen, the camera turns back on to a shot of him looking very distressed. He says that he had found another cave on the other side of the lake, then pans over to where he was sitting on what was now the far side of the lake. In that same shot, the off-white serpent surfaces out of the liquid and goes back under. The man then pans the camera back to him and talks about how he thinks this might finally be the way out before showing a much smaller cave that goes up another steep incline. Inside, the walls were becoming more purple than rock. The camera then cuts to black again before coming back on to show that the cave is now much smaller, and the man has to crouch to fit through it. It was at this point that the friend who was watching the tape with me complained about a weird feeling in her stomach. The man in the video comments on how he thought he heard another voice. Then, the sound of those weird, humanoid things from earlier can be heard far behind him. The man begins to panic as he moves faster up the tunnel. The walls at this point are completely purple and are pulsating more regularly. My watch partner started to feel more nauseous and suggested we take a break from watching. So, I went to stop the video, but the VCR wouldn't turn off. At that point, I yelled to the friend outside of the room to turn the power off. A few seconds later, the room went dark, but the TV and VCR remained on. The man at this point was crawling on his stomach through the ever-tightening tunnel as my watch partner was on the ground with her stomach convulsing and her hand over her mouth. The sound of those humanoids slowly grew louder as the man began panicking and moving faster up the tunnel. My partner began dry heaving. Suddenly, a gloved hand reached out of her mouth and began waving wildly. I wasn't sure what to do at first, but my first instinct was to grab the hand and begin to pull. I yelled for my friend outside to get in the room. When he did, his eyes went wide as he stood in the doorway, frozen. I told him to quit standing there and to get the TV off. By this point, both of the man's arms were coming out of her mouth, and I could hear the man yelling from inside. My friend finally ran over to the TV and unplugged it, but I could still hear the video going. I looked into my watch partner's eyes and only saw tears as she looked at the man's arms. then back up to me in horror. Her skin was getting paler as her mouth stretched further, letting the man's head finally come out. The man looked around. I could tell he was confused, but his main focus was to get out. He yelled at me to keep pulling and said that something was pulling at his legs. My friend behind me said that he couldn't get the video to stop, so I yelled at him to come over and help me pull. He grabbed the other man's hand, and we pulled together, but the man was suddenly jerked back and he yelled at us to pull harder. In one swift motion, the man was yanked back into her throat, and our arms were pulled in too. The three of us looked at each other in panic, my friend screaming, my watch partner trying to push us away, and me trying to pull the man out still. I heard the man suddenly yell at us to keep pulling because he had a plan. A couple seconds later, my friend and I were launched back, pulling the now slimy man out and onto the ground, his shoes missing. The man quickly got up and looked around before looking at the TV, realizing that his camera footage was being shown through it. My watch partner was knocked onto the ground when he flew out. She was still dry heaving and I could hear the sounds of those humanoid things coming out from her mouth. We all could. I looked up to the man, not knowing what to do until my watch partner said to turn off the camera in between her stomach convulsions. The man fumbled to get the camera off of his helmet, but got it off nonetheless, and pressed the power button. The TV suddenly went dark, and I heard my watch partner throw up. I took my phone out to use a flashlight while my friend went to turn the power back on. I looked around the room for a moment, and the man was nowhere to be seen. When the power turned back on, the camera was sitting on the ground where the man was standing. Beyond that was my watch partner, who sat hunched over, holding her stomach. In front of her was a pile of yellow stomach acid with a long, white tapeworm writhing around in it. I have a hardwood safe filled with cursed VHS tapes that are to never be watched by anyone, ever. Only because I have watched them and have faced and or witnessed the consequences. This post is a warning for the following VHS tape known as Human Coral. I have found 2 different copies of this, so I no more exist. So just in case you have found one, read this before you decide to watch it. The name of the tapes are called Human Coral 4 and Human Coral 2. They're blank Maxwell tapes, still in their case. The titles are written on both the cases and the tapes. Human Coral 2's runtime is about 3 hours, while Human Coral 4's runtime is 5 hours 23 minutes. There are no strict containment guidelines for these tapes, as they do not lure you to watch them, but I would recommend keeping them away from curious minds. If you are going to keep them locked up, put them in a wooden container with no metal hinges, as metal amplifies the energy of cursed objects. Finally, both tapes have a danger level of 2. See Part 1 for the danger guide on cursed VHS tapes. As I stated, I have found 2 Human Coral tapes. Number 4 was at an estate sale, and number 2 was in an independent thrift store. I'll start with number 2. My watch partner, who recovered from the traveling up the pipeline incident, if you're wondering, and I started watching, not really knowing what to expect. What do you first think of when you hear the words human coral? Anyway, the tape starts off with the viewpoint of some sort of submersible suspended over the ocean on a large boat. There's a date stamp on the bottom, October 21st, 1995. You can hear a couple male voices talking on the boat, but you can't quite make out what they are saying. All of a sudden, the submersible begins to descend into the water, and it begins its dive downward. It is here that you can clearly tell that they are very far out into the ocean, as it just goes down with no clear indication of where the bottom is. This takes up the first 2.5 hours of the tape, until a dim red glow comes into view. A sunken ocean liner begins to come into view, as it is covered in what looks like some sort of bioluminescent coral. But then the submersible gets closer and the full picture begins to unfold. It isn't coral, but a bunch of upper bodies of the same woman plastered all over the ship. Their long hair is what glowed red, and their bodies were a blotchy blue, red, and purple. Some of the bodies had additional arms and heads growing out of them. Their eyes were a milky white with the remnants of a pupil in the center. Their mouths looked like they were gasping for something, but it wasn't air. Different types of fish would swim around them, just like they were normal coral. But sometimes you could see one of the women grab one and eat it. None of them reached for the submersible, but they did seem curious, as most of them stared at it when it got close. The power suddenly shut off as my watch partner and I both realized that we didn't answer when my friend knocked on the door. We were both too mesmerized by the coral to answer. When my friend came into the room to make sure that we were okay, we both yelled at him for turning it off. He yelled back at us, resulting in a small fight, so we decided it was best to take a little break. It was during the break that my watch partner and I both realized what we had just done and came to the conclusion that the tape was some sort of ability to attract the viewer when they look at the coral, no matter the gender. With this in mind, we decided to slightly change what my friend would do. Instead of knocking, we would leave the door open and move the couch we were sitting on so our friend could easily see us. If we did anything weird, he would cut the power. After our 20-minute break, we began watching from where we left off. The coral women were staring at us and we were transfixed by them. I remember how at the time, I thought they were the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. Looking back at it now, I realized how truly terrifying it was. The submersible began moving all around the ship until it found an opening on one of the top decks. Going through the door, the hallway was rusty and overgrown with plant life, until it ran into more of the coral women. It was bizarre. The hallway they were growing from was in much better condition from the little we could see that wasn't grown over, to the point where you could still see one of the paints on the walls. The deeper the submersible went in, the more grown the coral women became. Some had grown out so much that you could see legs that were still fused together. The coral women kept staring at the camera. Some seemed to be beckoning the submersible to come closer, then pointing it in another direction down a different hall. They were leading it somewhere, and if it tried to go down a different hall, the coral women would make it impossible for it to fit through. After following the path they sent it down, it opened into a large room where every surface had a fully grown coral woman. Some were attached at the feet, some were attached by a hand. There was one where her back was fused to the wall, and several other coral women were growing out of her. In the center, a giant one sat crisscrossed. It glowed the brightest out of all of them and had several coral women growing out of her at odd angles. Some head first, like normal. Others just had their legs sticking out and everything else in between. It was almost like they weren't growing out of her, but rather were being absorbed by her. The giant one's eyes suddenly opened and stared at the submersible. It was at this point that my watch partner and I had gotten up, out of our seats, and began crawling towards the TV screen. The giant one slowly lifted her arms up and reached towards the submersible as it moved closer. By this point, my watch partner and I were both right up against the screen. The giant one then grabbed the submersible and pulled it into its chest. And I mean literally into its chest. It was crammed deep into a slit that had opened up. On either side of the opening, you could see different body parts of coral women that had been shoved into the giant one, but the submersible kept going deeper. It eventually stopped when it hit what looked to be a collar of a coat worn by a boat captain. The camera then panned up to see the face of a man covered in some sort of slime with an expression of shock and terror. Then, the eyes of the man darted to the camera before the tape ended. My watch partner and I both fell onto our backs, crying, either from the beauty we were both transfixed to, or the overwhelming emotion we got from the video. I'm not completely sure what. My watch partner asked if we could watch it again, and my friend outside the door walked in and said no before taking the tape out of the VCR. A week later, after we made sure that the effects of the tape had worn off, we began Human Coral 4, this time with the same open door setup as the end of Human Coral 2. Human Coral 4 is much different than 2, in that it already starts at the bottom of the sea. It is a static camera that pans to the left and right with a date stamp at the bottom reading October 19th, 1996, almost a full year after the last one. It looks like this was some sort of surveillance footage for something. For the first 3 hours, there's nothing, until a figure shows up in the distance, just inside of the light range on the camera. It isn't clear what it looks like, but my watch partner and I knew it was a coral woman. At this point, the camera stops panning and focuses on it. It was different from the ones in the last video. There seemed to be only one of them. Its hair was shoulder length, and the body was colored in patches of black, dark blue, and gray. A few minutes later in the video, the camera zooms in and you can see that the eyes are reflective, much like a normal deep-sea fish. It was moving slowly, but right towards the camera, and it had the most unnerving smile I'd seen for a while. The biggest difference was that this version of the coral woman didn't instill a feeling of yearning or lust. It instilled fear, the kind of fear where you can't move, the kind of fear that keeps you wanting to see more, the kind of fear that makes you easy prey. I couldn't look away, but I told my friend outside the door to be ready to cut the power. It suddenly stopped in place and stared at the camera. A man's voice over a radio came on reporting about the coral woman to someone. Then another man responded and said he would check it out. About 45 minutes later, a man in a heavy-duty looking diving suit walked past the camera, towards the coral woman before slowing and saying something over the radio. It was a little garbled, but he said, "What am I looking at? I'm not sure this is... It's getting harder to move." After a minute or two, the man in the diving suit stops moving. The coral woman then begins to move again, but this time faster. This time I noticed that she wasn't lifting her feet. She was dragging them on the ground. When she got up close to the man, she was much bigger than he was, by at least 3 feet. The last thing the man said was that he couldn't move before she wrapped her arms around him and began slowly sinking into the ground. The cries of panic that the man yelled out still haunt me to this day. Once he was fully underneath the sand, his radio cut off. The camera is suddenly knocked back by something rising from the seafloor. It then captures a bigger mass as it fully emerges out of the sand. A giant version of the coral woman looks down at the camera before reaching down for it. The tape ends there. My watch partner and I both sat there, frozen with a lingering fear dwelling in the back of our minds. It wasn't until a couple hours after the tape had ended that my friend snapped us out of our trance. He had been waiting for us to say something, but we couldn't speak. For the next couple weeks, my watch partner and I had recurring nightmares about this coral woman. But it eventually faded away. There's something that worries me about these 2 tapes. Unlike traveling up the pipeline, where you kind of get this feeling that what happened in the tape was never real to begin with, and something created it, this one seems like it's actual footage recovered from something. Like these are real creatures in the bottom of the ocean. That terrifies me even more. I have a hardwood safe filled with cursed VHS tapes that are never to be watched by anyone ever. Only because I have watched them and have faced and or witnessed the consequences. This post is a warning for the following VHS tape known as Tubes Demonstration 1. I only have 1 tape of this, but judging by the title and where I found it, I can assume that there are at least 2 more. If you find either a copy or a sequel to this, read this first, and I can't stress this enough, do not watch this tape. It has a danger level of 4. The name of this tape is Tubes Demonstration 1. It is a blank Sony tape in a black plastic case with a note card fastened to it with the title written on it. The runtime is unknown for reasons I will get into later. Keep this tape in a secure wooden box with no metal hinges. Metal only amplifies the energy of the tape. Finally, and I cannot stress this enough, it has a danger level of 4. See Part 1 for the danger guide on cursed VHS tapes. I acquired this tape by exploring an abandoned mental hospital with some friends in my state. We found a locked filing cabinet in the storage room of one of the main buildings, and since it was in a metal box, I could feel the energy coming off of the tape. When I opened it, there were 2 empty slots and 1 tape in a black case. My friends didn't really care about it, so they walked off while I put the tape in my bag. About a week later, I got my friend and watch partner together and set up in our new configuration with the couch pushed back and the door open. The video started with a title card saying it belonged to the mental hospital I took it from, and that taking it from the premises was unlawful and punishable with a large fine and jail time. It then cuts to a woman sitting on a bed in a hospital nightgown in a white room. She had short black hair and stared at the ground with clear, white eyes. In the bottom corner there was a timestamp of July 24th, 1986, and a name, Ashlyn. It was silent for the first couple minutes, just her staring at the floor until a door could be heard opening. Footsteps came in, stopping behind the camera. Ashlyn looked up at the person, then looked back down and to the right, then reached over and held onto her left arm. The person began talking. It was a man. He sounded old and probably was a doctor there. "Please demonstrate to the camera what you can do," he asked. "Why? So you can tell me I'm making it up? So you can tell me it's all in my head?" She said. She turned her attention to the man. "This entire time you've told me it's fake. You've told me that there's no physical way for my body to change like it does." She yelled. She stood up from the bed. She was much taller than my watch partner and I expected. "I realize that, Miss Ashlyn, but now that you have demonstrated that your body can in fact change, and we would like to record and study the transformation and your other form," the man said. She stood there for a second looking surprised, then aggravated. As she blinked, her eyes changed color. From the best I could see of the video quality, the right side of the right eye and the left side of the left eye turned black as her iris became a spiral of colors. "I knew this was a mistake. I should have left when I had the chance," she said. "I'm sorry, Miss Ashlyn, but you can't leave until we have documentation at the very least," the man said. She stood there for a second before looking down and closing her eyes, then opening them, looking at the man's location. Her pupils now dilated at sporadic angles. "Fine," she said as rocky protrusions bulged out of the sides of her arms. Her skin began changing colors. Rings of red, blues, yellows, and whites began to move down her body as her nightgown was being ripped off by the growths. Her hair began glowing purple, and coral-like tubes grew out of the top of her back like exhaust pipes. Symmetrical holes began forming on her torso and legs as the nightgown finally came off. The rocky protrusions opened up as black and white tubes slid out from them, 10 or so on each arm. Her cheeks became raw and cut up. It reminded me of Battle Angel Alita. She suddenly fell to her knees, clutching her stomach as a red liquid spewed from the exhaust pipes on her back and onto the walls. She grew bigger, veins pulsing all over her body until sharp red and black spikes sprang from the sides of her legs, and her shoulder blades shot out and wrapped over her shoulders before fusing together above her chest. She stopped growing when her head nearly touched the ceiling, still on her knees. There was a long period of silence as Ashlyn had her eyes closed and her head down. "Miss Ashlyn?" the man asked, his voice quivering. "Are you all right?" The tubes on Ashlyn's right arm suddenly jutted towards where the man was off screen. Then there was a squishy splat sound, followed by coughing and a muffled cry for help. Several red tubes came out of the holes in her torso and slithered their way towards the off-screen body of the man. The sound of clothes tearing and flesh being ripped apart could be heard as something began moving through the red tubes and into her body. After about a minute, the red tubes detached and slithered back into Ashlyn's body. The black and white tubes went limp and moved back towards Ashlyn's arm. However, there was no sound of the man's body hitting the floor. Ashlyn's upper body began to shake violently as she gritted her still white teeth. Then gallons black liquid burst from the exhaust pipes on her back, covering the whole room in an oily black sheen. My watch partner mentioned that what she just saw was going to give her nightmares, and that must have triggered what happened next. Ashlyn opened her eyes, and they were staring at me. The black and white tubes from her arms shot out towards the camera and through the screen, embedding themselves in the walls of my watch room. My friend outside the door saw this and ran to turn the power off. Ashlyn, on the other hand, was already crawling out of the TV. She could just barely fit through the large flat screen. My watch partner had the right idea and managed to jump in between two tubes and out the door. But when I tried to do the same, the tubes bloated up, making it impossible to get through. By the time I turned around, Ashlyn was already in the room and took up more than half the space. She reached for me with both hands and grabbed me by the torso, then brought me up to her face. I struggled to get free, but she shushed me and told me to look into her eyes. Her voice sounded like 10 homogeneous, pixelated voices in one. Her pupils suddenly moved out of her eyes, then fell back in like a water droplet into a pond. I felt like I fell into them too. Then it went all dark. I came to consciousness in some sort of hospital lobby. I wasn't really sure what was going on until I saw Ashlyn in her human form walk into the lobby with a man. The man led the way to the front desk where a woman sat, and he checked Ashlyn into the hospital. She looked guilty of something, but I wasn't quite sure what. The world faded to black again, then came back to a large room filled with patients. Ashlyn is there, sitting in the corner of the room by herself. The room begins to change around her. Patients come and go, and a season or two changes, when suddenly another woman shows up at her table. A patient as well. A couple days go by as they talk. Then Ashlyn decides to show this person her hand, as it begins to change colors and grow holes. The woman recoils in horror and runs away from the table. Everything fades away again as it becomes a solitary confinement room, and again, days go by with every now and then a man coming in and injecting a needle into her arm. Time goes back to normal as the man comes in again, but Ashlyn refuses the needle and tries to push the man away. Then, two men in white clothes come in and restrain her. She tries to shake them off, and eventually the black and white tubes come out of her arms and pin the men to the walls. The exhaust pipes pop out of her back as her body only partially changes. She grabs the man with the needle with one of the tubes and throws him against the metal door to her room, hard enough to dent it. Her eyes spiral with different reds until she realizes what she had just done and reverts back to her normal form. The room then fades to black, and I pop up in the hospital room coated in the oily black substance, with Ashlyn in her human form sitting on the bed looking at her nails. "I have been waiting in this room for a long time," she said before looking up at me. I took a step backwards, but I slipped in the liquid and fell on my back. "Sorry about that. He didn't agree with me," she said as she stood up from the bed. "What are you?" I asked, not sure what else to do. Why is it that everyone asks, "What are you, huh?" It's never a "Hi, how are you doing?" or "I love your nails, did you just get them done?" No, it's always, "What are you?" She said as she walked over to me. I felt a cold rush of adrenaline enter my body as I backed away from her, until I hit a wall. Suddenly, I felt something rubbery under my hand and looked down to see a large scrap of warped skin. I realized I was in a pile of it and shredded clothes. I wasn't sure what else to do, so I let out a scream. I was so focused on my fear in that moment that I didn't notice that Ashlyn had crouched down in front of me and placed her hand over my mouth. She put her finger up to her lips, telling me to be quiet. Her nails were painted black, the same color and sheen of the walls. "I'm going to take my hand off your mouth, and when I do, you're going to stop screaming, or I'll do the same to you, what I did to that doctor, 'kay?" Her white eyes felt like they were staring into my soul. I nodded and she removed her hand, then stood up and offered to help me up. I hesitated for a moment before taking her hand. She pulled me up on her own with no effort at all, then pointed me to the door. "Now, I need you to leave," she said. I looked at the door as it opened into a black void. "Where does that go?" I asked. "Out," she said. "Out? Meaning I can just leave?" I said. I thought there had to be some sort of trick to this. You saw some of my life and I saw all of yours. You have shit to do and so do I. So leave before I change my mind," she said, motioning to the door. I looked at her for a minute before looking at the door and leaving. Next thing I knew, I woke up in a hospital. When my friend turned off the power, both my watch partner and friend came back to see me floating in midair, where Ashlyn had been holding me. They tried to get me down, but I wouldn't budge until about 30 minutes later when I fell to the floor. After that, I was in a coma for 2 weeks. At least, that's what my watch partner told me. I'm still not sure where I went or what exactly happened, but I feel like I could have easily died. So why didn't I? Either way, 2 possible tapes are missing, and I don't know where they could have gone. So, if you find one, do not watch it. I have a hardwood safe filled with cursed VHS tapes that are to never be watched by anyone ever. Only because I have watched them and have faced and or witnessed the consequences. This post is a warning for the following VHS tape known as the Black Magic Virus. I'm not sure if there are any more of them, but this video is a visual hazard with a danger level of 3. See part 1 for the danger guide on cursed VHS tapes. The name of the tape is the Black Magic Virus. It is a blank Memorex tape with the title written on the cover and the tape itself. The runtime is about 10 minutes. Securing it may not be an issue, but just in case, keep it in a secure wooden container with no metal hinges or metal locks. Metal only amplifies the energy of the tapes. Finally, this tape has a danger level 3. This may change in the future, however. I acquired this tape from a friend online. This friend likes finding cursed objects, and on her most recent hunt, she stumbled across this tape and sent it to me. She didn't watch it, but she could tell there was something off about it, which, for someone who collects cursed objects, means there's something wrong with the tape. When I picked it up at the post office, I immediately noticed something weird about the tape. As I grabbed hold of the box the tape was in, I felt as if something was watching me. I couldn't place my finger as to where or what was watching me, but I knew that was a sign that this tape is cursed. I took it home with me, unboxed it, and put it on my safe. A week passed before my watch partner and friend got together, and throughout that week, I felt like something else was in the house with me, like I was being haunted by something. When we were all ready, I went to get the tape and noticed that it had moved in the safe. I told the other 2 about this and how I felt like I was being watched, but we agreed to watch the tape anyway. The tape starts out with a young man standing next to a dark train tunnel. Someone else is holding the camera. The date stamp at the bottom read November 17th, 1989. The man looks a little smug as he holds his long coat closed. There's a woman's voice behind the camera that says they're good to go. The man then begins speaking. "Hello, we are at the Black Magic Train Tunnel, home to one of the worst train accidents you've never heard of, and for a good reason, which we will get into that in a little bit." The man says as he takes out a flashlight and motions the camera to follow along. They begin to walk further into the tunnel, but the man looks like he is maneuvering around things that are not there. Occasionally he says, "Excuse me," before walking on like he's passing someone. He eventually stops in front of a large chunk of the ceiling that has caved in. On the piece of rubble, someone has graffitied the words "Black Magic" on it. Here's the namesake of the tunnel. The real name of the tunnel has been lost due to people taking this tunnel off the map and trying to make everyone forget about it. The man puts his flashlight on the rubble and points it up to light the area. I'm here to tell you the truth of this tunnel, and why you will probably never find it. It all started in 1915 when this tunnel was already 50 years old. A train filled with passengers is through, but this tunnel hasn't been maintained in a while, and no one knows that this piece of rubble and many others has fallen from the ceiling. So what happens? Collision. The train hits it dead on, killing almost every passenger on board except for one young man. He loses an arm, but continues living. Eventually, he comes back to the tunnel, which is now under repairs, and begins to see these weird things in the tunnel. He's confused until he starts to see some of the dead passengers of the train as well, walking towards him. He begins to freak out and tells some of the people who are repairing the tunnel what is going on, and then they start to see the passengers and these weird creature things as well. It's at this point in the video that you begin to see weird shadowy shapes around in the tunnel. The man keeps talking. Well, all of these workers begin to tell people back in the local town, and suddenly, they begin seeing these things too. Before you know it, the whole town is seeing weird creatures, and some of the passengers walk around town. Suddenly there is a head that pokes out of the top of the rubble, or at least looked like a head before it got closer to the man. The face of this thing was a giant eyeball. It was a weird purple color, and its body was the size of a gnome. It blinked a couple of times before sitting next to the light to make shadow puppets. You can hear the woman start to giggle at this thing, and it draws the attention of the man. "Hey there, how's it going?" the man says. The creature closes its eye and waves happily at the man, before playing with the light again. The man turns back to the camera as other strange creatures begin to walk past him. Well, you might see this little guy at this point, so let me explain a little bit more. Right now you may be wondering, well, if the whole town began seeing these creatures, how did it not spread to the neighboring towns, or the whole world for that matter? Simple. The town elected to ignore these things, wipe the tunnel off the map, and get rid of any evidence they could of the train crashing. How do I know this? I live in this town, and only a few people in the town still know about it. My great-grandfather, before he passed, decided to tell me. Now I'm telling you. The man then grabs the flashlight and waves goodbye to the eyeball thing. It waves back and runs past the camera. Why are you doing this? You may ask. Because I think it's time to introduce some magic into the world. To my understanding, the only way to see these things is to have someone who has already seen them tell you they're there. It's like a virus that sticks with you for the rest of your life. The problem is, I don't know if this will work over video, but if it does, then spreading the magic will go by fast. I've just got to make a few copies of this tape, send it to some news stations, and bam, we're put into a new age of wonder. The man takes his flashlight and points it further down the tunnel. You can see a few dozen creatures walking past them, some of them walking back down the tunnel. The tunnel originally was only about 1,000 feet long and curved, but as you can see, it is straight now and goes on much longer than 1,000 feet. Here's the problem, however. It doesn't seem to end. I've tried to find the end, but after a while, these creatures begin to warn me not to go any further. So I think whatever happened during that train crash caused some sort of portal or doorway to open up. The man then looks back at the camera and smiles. Anyway, that's enough from me. Hopefully this works, and if it doesn't, then I'll have to spread this information the old-fashioned way. The video cuts off there. My watch partner and I sat there for a second, thinking, then she spoke up. "Can you rewind the tape? I need to watch it again," she said. "What are you thinking?" I asked. "I want to see if we can..." She suddenly stopped as her eyes became fixed upon something behind me. "What's up?" I asked as I turned around to see what I could only describe as a long furry worm with a large human face. No nose and completely white eyes staring back at me. Its body was maybe 16 feet long and had 3 sets of legs to hold itself up. "What are you guys looking at?" my friend said. I I was going to say something when my watch partner spoke up. Nothing. We're looking at nothing, she said. The worm turned his attention to the VCR and walked over to it. It stuck out its tongue and used it as a finger to eject the tape, then grabbed it with its mouth and placed it in a satchel wrapped around the middle of its body that I didn't notice before. It then turned back to us. You now live in a very dangerous world. Its voice was quiet and shrill and sent a chill up my spine when it spoke. I cannot stop you from telling more people about us, but it would be in your best interest to not tell anyone, it said. Why? My watch partner asked. It suddenly moved at a high speed towards my watch partner, stopping only about a foot from her face. Because some of us are not so kind to humans, but we can only interact with you if you can see us. We moved closer to her face. And some wish only violence, and they know when you can see them. Seriously, what are you talking to? Did the tape make you crazy or something? My friend asked. Shut up for a second. I'll explain later, my watch partner exclaimed. Thought crossed my mind at that moment. Wait, why are you taking the tape now? I assume you were the thing that was watching me all week. Why wait until now to take it? It moved right in front of me. I noticed that it had the faintest outline of pupils in its eyes. Because we can only interact with objects if someone can see us. We are like ghosts in your world. The creature stared at me for a while before squinting its eyes and taking a step back. You will be safe. The thing you need to worry about is in your head, it said before turning to the doorway and running through it so fast that I barely saw it move in the first place. My friend felt a rush of wind go past him, then saw us looking at him. Alright, what the hell is going on? He asked. My watch partner and I looked at each other before looking back at him. Trust us. You really don't want to know, I said. It's been a short while since that incident, and I haven't run into anything that I would consider hostile. I've seen quite a few creatures since then, but it's sporadic. I can go days without seeing anything, but whenever I do, they ask me to help them with things. They all seem friendly, but that makes me worry. When will I find one that's hostile? And the thing the worm creature said about what's in my head still haunts me because I think I know what it is, and I still don't know what she wants. Either way, I figured out a little more about this black magic virus. In order to infect someone with it, one of those creatures needs to be around, and you need to specifically mention the creature to someone within their line of sight of it. You can't get infected any other way, so don't worry about it when you read this post. I'm not sure how many copies of this tape are there, or if that was the only one, but it is no longer in my possession. If you find one, I recommend containing or destroying it. Alternatively, if anyone finds a copy or any other cursed VHS tape, feel free to message me if you want to get rid of it. I will gladly take it off your hands. I have a hardwood safe filled with cursed VHS tapes that are never to be watched by anyone ever. Only because I have watched them and have faced and or witnessed the consequences. This post is a warning for the following VHS tape known as The Demon Girl of Room 2142. I only have one copy, and I swear to God I hope that no one else finds another one, because this is a danger level of 5. I will explain how I survive later. The name of the tape is Suzuka. It is a tape in its cover, distributed by US Manga Corp. However, I cannot find any evidence of it in any records or catalogs relating to US Manga Corp or any of its subsidiaries. The runtime is about 30 minutes. Destroy this tape using fire, or seal it in a wooden box with no metal hinges or locks. Metal only amplifies the energy of the tape. And once again, danger level of 5. See part 1 for the danger guide on cursed VHS tapes. If you haven't figured it out yet, this tape is an anime. I didn't even think that could happen until I found it in the bowels of a 4-story antique store that my friend Story told me to check out. Yes, his name is Story. Apparently there were more floors, but I couldn't find any stairs that went below the 4th floor. Anyway, the energy that came off of it was odd. I sensed it as soon as I walked into the room it was in. I even saw one of those creatures from the Black Magic virus tape, and they told me I shouldn't walk into the room. I'll be calling these creatures magicians from now on. The closer I got to the tape, the weirder I felt until I actually found it and grabbed it. The feeling went away in an instant, but I was drawn towards the cover. It was mostly black aside from the title on the top, and an upper torso of a high school anime girl with long black hair and a black school uniform surrounded by a black mist. The most notable thing about her was her eyes. The whites of them were black and her left iris was red, while the right one was yellow. I could swear I saw her moving in some way. Either the mist was moving around her, or her hair was moving or something, but my mind couldn't exactly comprehend how. When I left the room, the magician asked me if I knew what I was doing. I told it that I have experience dealing with cursed tapes, and that's how I was able to see that magician in the first place. It then scoffed at me and wished me luck before walking away. Later that week, I got the watch party together. My watch partner next to me on the couch and my friend outside, now with a switch wired up to the circuit breaker so he can cut it instantly. I told them what happened when I found it, and my watch partner was actually hesitant at first, but decided to go through with it. I put the tape in and pressed play. This is a graphic gore warning. The tape I'm about to describe has some very intense gore and weirdly graphic depictions of death that I will be writing about. If you do not like that, or if it triggers you, stop reading now. The anime style matches up to the golden age era of anime, which wasn't exactly known for their subtlety when it comes to blood, gore, and other things that begin to fall into weirdly sexual territories. That being said, there is no depictions of sex in this anime, but there is some fucked up shit. You have been warned. It started without running ads for another anime that would have been on VHS at the time. It went to a dark screen with an ominous bass line playing in the background. Red text then appeared in Japanese, and below it were yellow subtitles that read, "The Demon Girl of Room 2142. The screen then faded again, and another red text showed up. The name Suzuka presented on the screen. The screen then opens up to 2 men and 1 woman standing in front of a large abandoned apartment mega complex. Behind them is an entrance gate that is sectioned off by futuristic police cars. A character begins monologuing in English as it pans against different shots of the building and the 3 characters. The monologue went something like this. The police got a call about 2 days ago about a murderous ghost somewhere on the 21st floor of the building. Apparently some college kids were exploring up there and encountered a nasty possessor-type entity that did a real number on the group. Only 1 guy made it out and managed to call the police. They didn't take it too seriously and sent 2 policemen to check in on it, but when they didn't come back, they took it more seriously. They sent more men in, but no one came out, and then they tried to radio them in. All they got was a weird garbled mess of indiscernible noises. That's when they called us. The monologue stopped when one of the men put his hand up to his shoulder and spoke into a radio. "Haruna, are we good to go?" The screen cuts to a woman sitting at computers and other electrical equipment that I couldn't make out. Underneath the text, outside next to some cop cars. "You're good to go, Daisuke. You take points since you have the shoulder-mounted camera," the woman said. "Sounds good," the man responded. He then reached for a switch for the equipment on his back. They were all wearing something that looked like the equivalent of a proton pack, but instead of a gun attached to the side, the 2 ran along the right arms with some sort of emitter attached to their wrist and a cord attached to a visor over their eyes. "Alright, let's go," Daisuke-san. The two others followed behind him as they went into the building. There were a few shots of them walking up the stairs of the building with flashlights, and we get short introductions to the four characters: Haruna, the tech wizard and researcher of the team; Daisuke, the team lead and the longest running member that hasn't quit or died; Aito, the goofball type character that has been with the team for a couple years; and Ayeko, the newest member. When they get to the 21st floor, they notice blood running from underneath the door. They all press a button to the wrist emitters as they light up and extend slightly. Daisuke gives a thumbs up before opening the door. The hallway they enter is covered in blood. Ayeko gasps slightly at the sight. Daisuke looks around the hall from the doorway for a second before looking back at Aito and Ayeko. It doesn't seem to be nesting, so we can cross a nester off the list, he said. Nester? Ayeko asked. An entity that creates a suitable spawning ground for more ghosts, spirits, demons, you name it. Aito said. Suddenly there's a commotion further down the hall coming from an open room. Daisuke sticks his hand out, signaling the others to stand back until the commotion stops. Then he turns to Aito and Ayeko with a finger over his lips and begins moving quietly towards the open room. They all move slowly towards the room. Then it cuts to Haruna, outside at her computer monitoring the footage. Another frazzled-looking young man is standing behind her watching the screen. When he points to the open door the other three are walking towards. There, that's the room where it happened, the man said. Daisuke, we have confirmation that the room is where the initial possession took place, Haruna said, talking into her radio. She puts it down, then stares at the screen for a little while longer, thinking. Why are there no bodies? She said quietly to herself. It cuts back to Daisuke, who confirms the call on the radio and tells the other two, then keeps moving forward. The sound of a knife chopping something gets louder as they near the door. They all stop on one side of the door. Then Daisuke raises his hand in a hold position while he looks inside. The shot switches to a first-person view as he sees what looks like Suzuka, the woman on the cover of the tape, chopping something up with a knife with her back turned. The room around her is covered in blood, but there are still no bodies. She then sticks something in her mouth as she tilts her head up, and we see an arm sticking out of her mouth as it slowly slides down her throat and disappears. She then goes back to cutting up whatever's in front of her. Daisuke quickly leans back behind the door and looks forward, wide-eyed in terror. What do we got? Aito whispers. A feeder, he said, still in shock. A feeder? Aito whispers, now also wide-eyed. A what? Ayeko whispers. I knew it, Haruna said over the radio. Ayeko, a feeder is an entity that feeds off of bodies to build power, dead or alive. But we got an abnormal one, Daisuke interrupted, looking down at Ayeko, still afraid. Feeders are typically fat and bloated. This one is skinny, and with the intel we got, this thing has eaten 3 teams of cops, 1 SWAT team, and whatever poor, unfortunate souls were already in this building as well. Oh my god, Ayeko whispers, covering her mouth with her hand. Okay, how are we going to take care of it? Aito whispers. Daisuke thinks for a moment before looking back over at Aito. He's about to say something when a hand comes around the corner and grabs him by his collar, yanking him into the room. The shot cuts to Daisuke being thrown across the room and landing on his side, sliding in the blood and crashing into the wall the woman was feeding at. Didn't your mother ever teach you it's impolite to spy on others? Suzuka said, walking over to him. It cuts back to Ayeko and Aito, who look at each other in panic. Before Ayeko runs in the room, Aito tries to grab her but misses. He panics for a moment before letting out a worried sigh and running in after her. The shot moves back into the room where Aito joins Ayako. Both of them point their emitters at the woman. Oh? I thought there was more of you. Guess I was right. So what's your guys' plan? You gonna try to kill me? Shoot me where I stand? Suzuka said, motioning around the room. It cuts to shots of Aito and Ayako glancing around the room where bullet holes pocket every wall and empty shells litter the ground. It then cuts back to Suzuka. Unless you have something bigger than .40 caliber, you're not getting out if you're alive. And you want to know the worst part? Her red eye began to glow as she motioned her head to the right. The door to the room slammed shut. You're stuck in here with me, she said, reaching behind her back as she begins to walk towards Ayako, pulling out a dirty knife, when she is suddenly hit in the back by a bright blast. The woman jerks forward in pain. Then the shot cuts to Daisuke on one knee with his emitter pointed at Suzuka. Sorry, lady, but we're specialists, Daisuke said as he stood up. Suzuka stands there for a moment, leaned over with her hair covering her face. A second or two passes before she starts to laugh to herself. Do it again, she said quietly. What? Ayako said. Do it again. Suzuka yelled as she ran towards Ayako, knife first. It cuts to Ayako, who fired on instinct at Suzuka. A bright flash and a red beam shoots out of her wrist emitter and hits Suzuka square in the chest. Aito and Daisuke follow suit. Suzuka stands there with her head tilted upwards, screaming, unable to move. Eventually they stop firing and she lets her head fall down. The door suddenly swings open and it cuts to Suzuka's face as she lifts her head back up. The camera zooms in on her yellow eye. It then cuts to a shot of Suzuka from behind Aito and Ayako. Suzuka's body begins to bulge and expand in different areas until tears begin appearing on her flesh. Aito realizes what's going on and runs out the door, but Ayako stands there in fear. Daisuke runs past Suzuka and goes to shield Ayako, but it's too late. Suzuka explodes. The camera quickly cuts to the point of view of Suzuka and moves towards Ayako's face, into her right eye. It then cuts to an outside shot of the apartment building. Blood and body parts explode out the side of the building and cascade onto the ground below. The camera zooms into one of the windows as it's drained with gore. Daisuke is hanging on to the side of it. Then it cuts to a shot of him climbing back inside where he sees Ayako, standing in the doorway facing away from the room. Ayako? He asked. Her pack suddenly disconnects and falls to the ground as her body starts changing. When she turns around, we see Suzuka in Ayako's body, smiling. She begins walking towards Daisuke, pulling a knife from behind her back before the tape suddenly stopped. The VCR started making weird sounds, like every moving part in it was turning in every direction. Cut the power, my watch partner yelled. My friend flipped the switch and it went dark. However, we could hear the actual tape begin to spool out of the VCR. Cracks of light showed up near the VCR and we realized it was coming from the tape itself. Turn the power back on, I shouted. My friend flipped the switch, and when lights came back on, everything stopped. The VCR stopped making sounds and the tape was no longer lit up. What the hell just happened? I asked. I looked at my friend who shrugged. Then I looked at my watch partner. I wasn't sure how to react, but it was her body, her face. She now had long black hair, a black schoolgirl outfit, and her eyes were a familiar black, red, and yellow. Hello, boys, she said as she pulled a knife out of nowhere and tried to stab my leg. I managed to move out of the way and off of the couch. A black mist formed around her, quickly dispersing throughout the room. It's about time someone brought me into this world. My friends and I have been waiting for so long. Well, at least I made it, she said as she took another swing at me. She nicked my arm as I got away. I ran out the door and crashed into my friend, causing us both to fall to the ground. Suzuka was close behind me, so I rushed to move away, but my friend wasn't so lucky. She knelt on top of him and stabbed him in the gut. He let out a scream of pain as she pulled the knife back out. "I'll come back for you later," she said, getting back up and looking at me. I got up as quickly as I could and ran, but a black shroud covered the entire hallway, blocking me from going any further. I turned around to see with her hand on the wall, where I assume she created the shroud. "You can scream if you would like, but as a reward for bringing me here, I'll make your death swift and mostly painless," she said as she came walking towards me, laughing to herself. I thought that was the end. I was going to die from watching one of these tapes. There was nowhere to go and nothing I could do. I was just about to give in when black and white tubes suddenly came out from behind her, grabbing Suzuka by the arms and legs. She was then struck in the back and my watch partner came flying out, falling in front of me. What was left was a humanoid figure being held up by the tubes. It was quickly pulled into the shroud behind it, and the sound of screaming and flesh being stabbed was all I could hear until there was nothing left. A pair of multicolored eyes became visible through the darkness, and I heard a voice in my head. "You still have shit to do," Ashlyn said. The shroud vanished after that, and we were back in the hallway. "What the fuck just happened?" my friend on the ground said. I stood there flabbergasted for a moment. "I think we just got our asses saved," I said. "Great. Can you call an ambulance, please? Kinda bleeding out here." We took my friend to a hospital. He's in bad condition, and the doctor said it was going to take time for him to recover. My watch partner was okay, but she has elected to opt out of the next couple tapes to recover from being possessed. The tape itself was destroyed when Suzuka came out of it, but she mentioned something about friends, which worries me. I feel like there could be other tapes out there that are similar to this one. I'm not sure what Suzuka was, but she's gone now. I hope. I'm not 100% sure what Ashlyn did to her, and I don't think I really want to know either. I have a temporary watch party until my friends come back. I will introduce them in the next part, but holy shit. I have a feeling I've started something that I can't reverse. Anyway, if anyone has a cursed VHS tape that they want to get off of their hands, feel free to message me and we'll work something out. I have a hardwood safe filled with cursed VHS tapes that are to never be watched by anyone, ever. Only because I have watched them and have faced and or witnessed the consequences. This post is a warning for the following VHS tape known as Sholoff, The Manor That Breathes. I do not believe there are any other copies of this, but just in case, this has a danger level of 4. The name of the tape is Sholoff, The Manor That Breathes. It is a blank TDK tape with the title written on the cover and the tape itself. There is no runtime. I'll explain this later. Keep secure in a wooden box with no metal attached. Metal only amplifies the energy of the tapes. Finally, this tape has a danger level of 4. See part 1 for the danger guide on cursed VHS tapes. I found this tape while helping a friend move boxes out of his recently deceased grandfather's house. It was in a box by itself, hidden in the back corner of a closet. I asked if I could take it, and he said yes. That was a while ago, and I finally came around to watching this one. The new watch party now consists of a magician, a creature seen via the black magic virus named Debbie, and my friend, Story. Yes, that's his name. Debbie is a human-looking magician I met at a coffee shop. She told me that she used to be human back in the 80s until she was killed in a car crash. The next thing she knew, she woke up in the black magic tunnel. She left and realized that no one could see her, and those that could didn't interact with her. However, she quickly became friends with a bunch of other magicians and began traveling the world. Her appearance is relatively normal looking. She wears a black leather jacket with a dark green button-up shirt and a black shirt with tights. She wears Dr. Martens boots, one green and one black. Her hair and makeup is very 1980s goth. The thing that keeps her from looking completely human-looking are the holes in her hands, and a large hole in her torso that's filled with a weird black mist where she can store things. Most of the time, it's covered up by her shirt. Story is the guy who introduced me to cursed videotapes. He's weird in the sense that he can find paranormal things without even trying, and not just tapes. To put things into perspective, he already knew about magicians long before I even found the black magic virus tape. He has a journal that he carries around with him where he writes down everything he finds or experiences. That journal gives off more energy than any tape I have ever found. Even more than Suzuka's tape. He's a normal-looking guy, though. The most unassuming person in the world. He has a black jacket he wears everywhere, a black paperboy hat, blue jeans, and red and white Converse. He's also kind of quiet and doesn't talk about his experiences unless he trusts you. He doesn't want to seem crazy. I made sure to get his permission to talk about him before I wrote this, just to be clear. Story sat outside the doorway with the kill switch while Debbie sat on the couch with me. I quickly brushed them up on the kind of things that my previous watch party and I had encountered while watching, and made sure that they were both up to the task. Story was good to go, and Debbie said, in her words, "I've already died once. I'll be fine." I took the tape out of the cover and placed it into the VCR. As soon as I pressed play, it was like someone flipped a switch. The temperature of the air changed, the lighting dimmed, and I noticed I wasn't even in my watch room. I was standing in the middle of a dark oak paneled hallway with a breeze gently blowing past me. I looked around me and I couldn't find Debbie or Story. They had disappeared. There was a window near me, but it was dark outside and there weren't any external lights. I couldn't tell where I was. I wasn't exactly sure what else to do, so I began wandering. The hall was lined with dark oak wood paneling with intricate artworks placed in between columns of black marble, and every third column was a closed dark wood door. Every now and then, there would be a small chandelier with light bulbs in place of candles, which meant the place had power. The hallway didn't go on too much further. It stopped at a heavy set of double doors. I tried the handle and it opened to a large ballroom, complete with a small stage and everything. "Hello?" I called out. My voice echoed through the room. Then it fell to a dead silence. No one answered. I looked around the ballroom from the door, looking for another exit, but this seemed like the only way in. So I closed the door and went back into the hallway. Here's where a major problem began. When I turned around, it was a different hallway. Same style, but different layout. It was another long hallway, but I could see a set of stairs that went up and down a little further along the way to my right. And at the very end of the hall was a weird violet wall of melted glass. It piqued my curiosity, so I walked over to it. The floor was a little more creaky than before, like the wood was older, and the more I paid attention, I realized that everything in this hall was covered in a thin layer of dust. I got over to the violet glass and examined it for a second. It looked like it was hastily poured into the hallway to block something off, but I could still see through it. That is when I saw Story on the other side. "Story!" I yelled through the glass. Luckily, he was able to hear me. He was writing something in his journal when I caught his attention. He put his journal away, then came rushing over to me. "Are you all right?" I yelled. He put his finger over his lips, motioning me to stay quiet. He took his journal back out and began writing in it. After a bit, he showed it to me through the glass. "There are deadly things in here. It's some sort of purple humanoid with blue spots covering its back. If you see one, hide. Have you seen Debbie?" It read. I mouthed the words back to him. "I haven't seen Debbie." He nodded at me, looking worried for a second before writing in his journal again. "How much time has passed for you?" About 5 minutes, I mouthed, holding 5 fingers up. He looked even more worried with his eyes going wide and his brows furrowed in confusion. He wrote one last thing in his journal. I don't think time is linear here. Find a clock if you can. It should be counting down. I think that's how long we have here until the tape ends. I'll try to find a way to get to you. Remember, be quiet. I gave him a thumbs up as I pushed away from the glass. He put his journal back in his bag and gave a little nod before turning around and heading down the hall. He turned the corner and went down another hall before suddenly coming back running. He ran to a door close to the glass and hid inside it. Before closing the door, he motioned at me to run. Coming from down the hall was a bulky humanoid crawling on all fours. It had purple skin and an elongated face that ended in a lamprey-like mouth. There were blue spots on top of its head and thick, gray spines coming out of its back. It came running towards the glass, but stopped just short of it and stared at me with its milky white eyes. Out of nowhere, it began headbutting the glass. I took a couple steps back, not sure if the glass would hold, but I watched as it kept hitting its head. After a couple more hits, the glass began to crack. At that point, I figured it was a good time to run, so I did. I turned around and began running to the staircase I saw earlier. As soon as I got to the stairway, I heard the glass shatter and turned to see the humanoid running after me. I chose to go down as I was faster going downstairs. I could hear it following me the entire time until I got to the bottom floor when a small gust of air rushed over me. I heard a thunk behind me and saw that there was no longer a staircase but a window. It was still dark outside, but I had somehow actually gone up a floor based on what I could see. "There you are," I heard from my right. I looked to see Debbie walking over to me with an older man I had never seen before. "Ah, you must be the one who found the tape, aren't you?" the man said. He spoke with something that sounded like a Scottish accent, but his terminology resembled that of American English. He wore a blue sweater and khakis with a gun strapped to his hip. Yeah. You don't happen to have an explanation of what's going on, do you?" I asked. "I do. Stick close to me. I'll take you to a safe room," he said as he motioned to come with him. I followed him for a while, not really knowing where we were going, but Debbie trusted him. I wasn't exactly sure how this man, who I learned was named Colin, could see her, but he said he would explain everything when we got to his safe room. After a long walk, we got to a door that led to what looked like a small cottage. Colin closed the door behind him, fastened various locks, and finished by placing a heavy wooden plank across it. The room we were in was a large living room area with 2 couches and a recliner in front of a coffee table and an old TV with a PlayStation 2 hooked up. Next to the TV was a cobblestone fireplace that was the main source of light. The wood paneling on the walls was similar to the hallways I was walking through earlier, but it wasn't as nice or as polished. "Do me a favor and look at the clock on the wall over there," Colin said. Debbie and I looked over to the clock. We both saw something different. For me, it was frozen at 5:22. Well, for her, it was stuck at 4:35. "Hey, what's the meaning behind the different times on the clock?" she asked. "The clock, and any other clock you see, is a countdown to how long you have before you go back to wherever you came from," Colin said as he took his gun off his belt and placed it on a small table lamp next to his recliner he sat down in. "What do you mean by that? What is this place?" I asked. "Welcome to Sholoff Manor, a place that exists in several different worlds at once. The reason the clock is stopped for the both of you is because this is technically not a part of the original manor. I had it built when these monsters began showing up. The clock only ticks down when you're inside the manor, proper. And if you're wondering why the tape you watched brought you here, I don't know. I'm not sure who made it or why it works like that, but you're stuck here for 6 hours. I know this because you are not the first people to come here by tape. although it has been a long time since anyone has, he said, turning on his PS2 and putting a Tetris game on. Wait, what do you mean by monsters? Debbie asked. Are those the weird purple humanoid figures? I asked. Bingo. You're pretty lucky you survived an encounter with that one, with you having no weapons at all. Although, if you can get a well-placed shot to the head, that'll typically take them down, he said. So, why does the manor keep changing? Debbie asked. As I said, this place exists in multiple different worlds at the same time. What no one realized in any world was that the manor was built on top of a cave system that somehow managed to connect each other manor together. Growing up was weird because shifts weren't very common, so it was weird when one day you had a stranger in your house, only to realize you were in their house. Within the last 30 years or so, the shift has only been slowly becoming more frequent, and you can usually tell when a shift happens because you'll feel a breeze come over you. Sometimes if you make a big gust of wind using something in the house, it can cause a shift, he said, starting his Tetris game. Right. I assume this isn't Earth then, Debbie asked. No, this is a world called Terra, and unless you want to live in this world for the rest of your life, you're going to have to back into the manor and spend the full 6 hours in there, he said. You're not going to keep us here, are you? I asked. No, you are free to leave if you would like. I'll even give you some food and something to protect yourself with. This is just a safe place to talk and get you informed on what's happening to you, he said. Okay, well I think I'll take some supplies and get going if that is okay with you. We still have a friend out there and I want to make sure that he's okay, I said. Yeah, also, how can you see me? You haven't explained that one yet, Debbie asked. Your kind isn't too uncommon here. Everyone knows about you guys, he said as he paused his game and got up from his seat. Let me make you guys some packed lunches real quick. I don't need food, but thank you, Debbie asked. That's right. Forgot you guys don't need to eat. I'll just make one then, he said as he walked through an open door into what looked like a kitchen. A little while later, he came out with a wrapped cloth and some water bottles and handed them to me. Debbie then took it and placed them in her torso, which weirded Colin out for a second. He then walked over to his fireplace, grabbed 2 machetes, and handed them to us. Really prepared, aren't you? I asked. You'd be surprised at how many random people get lost in here. I just want to make sure they get out with a fighting chance, he said, walking over to the locked door. Huh. Respectable, Debbie said. Colin unlocked the door and checked both sides of the hall before letting us out. If for whatever reason you guys need to come back here, knock on the door to the tune of shave and a haircut. Do you guys know what that is? He asked. Debbie and I both nodded yes. Good. Best of luck to the both of you. And if you run into any other owners, tell them what is going on and that you met me, he said as he closed the door. The sound of several locks could be heard afterwards. With that, we set on our way to find Story. We stayed close together. We knew that if we got too far apart and a shift happened, we would be on our own. We walked for an hour or so until we came across the same melted wall of violet glass the humanoid crashed through earlier. I heard footsteps suddenly and looked to the staircase only to see that same humanoid come up and stop in front of us. It must have just arrived when I managed to escape the first time. It stared at me, tilting its head to the side as if confused. Without warning, it jumped towards me and widened its mouth. I put my hands up on instinct, but Debbie managed to swing at it just fast enough to cut through its mouth and into its skull. It died on impact, but still fell on me, pinning me to the ground and getting blood all over my face. Debbie helped push it off of me and yanked the machete out of its head. Let's try to avoid that in the future, shall we? She said, reaching out a hand. Thankfully, we only ran into 3 more afterwards that we were able to hide from, but time was ticking down and eventually Debbie disappeared in a bright flash. The only thing that was left behind was a small pile of VHS tape with her name written on it. I assumed her time was up, which meant I had 48 minutes to find Story. A long time passed, with my time getting shorter as I walked through the hallways and up and down stairs, until I heard arguing coming from a hall further down the way. As I got closer, I recognized one as Story, but I couldn't quite tell who the other one was until I rounded the corner. A bright light flashed as a piece of VHS tape fell to the ground. "Story?" I asked. "Hey," he said, looking in a much better mood. "Who were you talking to?" I asked. "I'm not sure, if I'm honest," he said, walking over to me. "Okay, well, that's what happens when the 6 hours are up, and I already saw Debbie leave. So who else could have come with us?" I asked. "I don't know, but she said her name was Ashlyn. Does that ring a bell to you?" he asked. My eyes went wide with fear. By that response, I'll take that as a yes. "What did she want?" I asked. "I'm not sure. She came up to me and demanded that I tell her where you are. Is there something you're not telling me?" he asked. I wasn't sure what to do at that moment, but I knew that Story is no stranger to supernatural and paranormal events and creatures. Hell, he's the one that introduced me to cursed VHS tapes in the first place. He knows more than I do. So, I told him what happened. "Huh. Okay. I can do some research and ask around if anyone or thing knows what's going on with this monster lady in your head," he said. I wasn't sure why, but it sounded like there was something else he wasn't telling me, and I was about to ask when suddenly a bright light flashed around me and I blacked out. I woke up a little bit later on the ground next to the VCR. I heard the tape click to a stop. I looked back to Debbie, who was waking up on the couch, and Story, who woke up on the floor in the middle of the doorway. "Is everyone alright?" I asked. "Got a headache, but I'm good," Debbie said. "I'm good," Story said. "Good, let's never watch that tape again," I said. I later confronted Story and asked if he was holding back info from me, but he swore he wasn't, and I didn't want to drive him away by calling him a liar, so I let it go. He's my best bet for finding out more about what's going on with Ashlyn. He's in the middle of researching and will get back to me if he finds anything. My friend who got stabbed is still in the hospital, but he is recovering. It's going to take a few more weeks until he's ready to come back, if he wants to come back. I actually haven't talked about that with him yet. My watch partner is going to take another week or 2 off before she comes back. I don't know why I didn't go to Story about Ashlyn first, but at least he's looking into now. However, there is no guarantee that he'll find anything either. Anyway, if anyone has any cursed tapes that they want to get rid of, feel free to message me. I will gladly take them off your hands. I have a hardwood safe filled with cursed VHS tapes that are to never be watched by anyone, ever. Only because I have watched them and have faced and or witnessed the consequences. This post is a warning for the following VHS tape known as Further Void Layer Exploration Funding. I doubt there would be any copies, but just in case there are more, read this. This tape was given to me by a magician named Carthan. I was relaxing at home when I heard a knock on my door. I opened it, and a little light brown eyeball stood there on 2 tiny legs, wearing a satchel and a little postman-like hat. He waved at me, then reached into his bag and pulled out a tape and a note. I took them from him, and he waved and went on his way. The note read as such. "Hello, Valen. That is my name. Now you know. My name is Carthan. I am what you call a magician. I have learned of your efforts to educate people on cursed tapes and have decided to send you one that I have found on my journeys. It is a level 2 based on your danger rating. I won't write too much about it because I want you to experience it yourself with your watch party. You should be safe, but I do apologize if anything bad does happen. If I find any more tapes, I will be sure to send them your way. Your friend, Carthen. The tape itself is packaged much like Tube's Demonstration 1 was. It was in a black plastic case covered in dust, and inside the tape was labeled Further Void Layer Exploration Funding. The runtime is about 7 minutes. It does not need to be contained, but if you desire to, keep it in a wooden box with no metal hinges or locks. Metal only amplifies the energy of the tape. And finally, it has a danger level of 2. See part 1 for the danger guide on cursed VHS tapes. I'm back with the new watch party. Debbie the magician taking the place of my watch partner, and Story on the kill switch. I placed the tape in and pressed play. It started with a title card with a location of somewhere in Russia and a date of May 1st, 1997. It also had a warning about actions that would be taken against unauthorized viewers of the tape. Then it started. It suddenly cut to a man who had just pressed play on the camera he was using. It showed him sitting in a chair with a small control panel behind him and a large window that looked out into a dark void. "Hello, my name is Carl Fisher," he said, pushing up the glasses on his face. He wore a green sweater with a red flannel underneath poking out of the top of it. "I am a member of the Dark Moth Corporation in charge of monitoring Outpost 7 of the Void Layer. This video will highlight some of the activity of the Void Layer for review by the head of the committee in charge of exploring, documenting, and pinpointing the origins of the Void Layer. As you know, the Void Layer is a segment of the Earth's crust that was discovered when the Russians drilled the Kola super deep borehole. Once they broke into it, Operation seized and control was handed over to the Dark Moth Corporation. We still have yet to understand what the Void Layer is or why it is here, and we are nowhere near close to getting those answers. But hopefully this video should prove that it is still worth attention and further funding for exploration. The video then cuts to another angle of the large window with Carl sitting in front of the control panel from the previous shot. Here's what we know about the Void Layer as of this recording. It is a shifting, anomalous cavity that produces random entities that reflect objects, places, and people on the surface. Most of them are random with seemingly no reason to generate in the first place. They eventually fade away and are never seen again. There are only a handful of recurring anomalies, with only one posing a threat on a very minimal level. Carl pressed a few buttons on the panel, then flipped a switch which turned on lights that shined into the void. What popped up was a telephone pole with several broken wires hanging off of it, and one wire that trailed off further into the darkness, beyond what the lights could see. This was the first recurring anomaly that we recorded. It is a telephone pole that looks as if it has been there for a long time, as there is visible wear on the body and degradation of the wires. However, we have managed to get a positive charge from the dangling wires. We got authorization to send a team of 2 to follow the one remaining wire that seems to lead somewhere, but the team lost contact with us 3 hours into the journey and have not recovered since. They did not report to any other telephone poles, but did confirm that the wire keeps going. All of a sudden, the sound of a horn began to emit from somewhere above the outpost. Carl stopped talking and listened for a second, flipping a few different switches on the panel, then pulled over a TV on a rolling stand, turned it on, and watched out the window. The sound grew louder until a semi-truck with a trailer attached could be seen maybe 50 feet away from the window, falling past and into the darkness below. The headlights of the truck shined bright until it disappeared into the void. Carl sat there for a second with a blank expression on his face until he turned towards the camera. "Well, there is usually ground there," he said. The footage cuts to another shot of Carl in front of the TV he pulled over. "What you saw earlier was captured on a high-speed camera mounted on the outside of the outpost," he said, taking a remote from the stand and began turning a knob. As he turned it, the truck began to fall into frame. The front of the cab was facing the camera, and something looked off with the windows. He zoomed into the frame and waited for the image to become more clear. Once it focused, you could see a fleshy mass behind the windshield with a large smiling mouth and 2 large eyes, one bigger than the other one. As you can see, a large semi-truck had manifested from somewhere above and had fallen to an immeasurable depth that exceeds the spatial limits that we have recorded in the past of the surrounding area. You can also see that there is something filling up the cab of the semi. We cannot determine what is filling it, but it seems to enjoy whatever is going on in this frame. He let it sit on that frame for a while before turning off the TV. The camera then cuts again to Carl sitting at the control panel with a wide angle of the window. That anomaly is a perfect example of the randomness and the variety of what occurs in the void layer. The truck itself looked to be a mid-80s Mack truck with an American license plate. We are in the process of seeing if that plate correlates to a real-world plate. The camera then cuts again to Carl, but he is wearing different clothes, and his hair is a little longer. The window is off to the side of the shot, as he looks to be hiding underneath it. He moves the camera towards the window as it pans to a woman standing next to the telephone pole, a head taller than it. She is wearing a black summer dress. Her hair is white, and her eyes are black. Her skin is weirdly translucent with black veins running through her body. Her feet are cut off. She just kind of floats there, and her eyes look like they are twitching, but it is hard to tell. Carl begins to talk quietly from his hiding spot just off camera. This is our reoccurring anomaly I talked about that poses a minimal threat. We call her Big Jenny. For reference, the telephone pole is normal sized. She usually doesn't get any closer, but sometimes she gets right up close to the glass. She cracked it on one occasion and we had to replace it. It is random when she will show up, and most of the time we will go into lockdown mode just to be safe. The longest time on record we have of her manifesting is 4 hours, 23 minutes, and 49 seconds. As we speak, I am using the high-speed camera to monitor her movements and assess her actions to decide if we need to go into full lockdown or not. As previously stated, she does not usually get any closer, but she will train her attention onto one standing in front of the window. You will know when she is looking at you, as bright white pupils will glow from within her eyes. I will now demonstrate. You can hear Carl put down the remote and stand up from his hiding spot. You can see his reflection in the window, but Jenny's eyes suddenly start glowing, when the glow narrows to look like pupils as she focuses in on him. It is unclear what she is doing when she is looking at someone, but she shows the ability to copy most motions she sees, which could also mean she has some level of intelligence. I will now demonstrate, he said as he began waving his hand at her. When he stopped, Big Jenny slowly raised her hand and waved back, then put it down. Her eyes began to twitch in different directions rapidly, and her head started violently shaking. Don't be alarmed, this is normal, Carl said. She raised her hands and placed them on her head as it kept shaking. The sound of hundreds of voices being heard through an extremely compressed audio file screamed out of her mouth as she seemed to levitate into the air. Her body began separating itself until it quickly faded into nothing. The screams echoed for a few seconds. That is what happens when she disappears. We were concerned the first couple times, but there seems to be no residual effects after she vanishes. The tape cuts again to Carl sitting in front of the control panel. We were able to get a match on the license plate of that semi-truck to an identical one that went missing traveling through northern Nevada, which leads to all new theories as to what the manifestations in the void layer are. It is a worthy cause to further the funding of this project. We have begun to gather more information that could help us discover what this place is. Thank you for your time and consideration. The tape then cuts off there. The tape wasn't nearly as bad as I thought it was going to be, Debbie said. They're not always super dangerous, I said. Is it safe then? Can I watch it too? Story asked. I brought him in and rewound the tape, then let him watch it. He was fascinated by it. So, there's a layer in the Earth's crust where things manifest in a void. I feel like that shouldn't surprise me, but it does, he said with a puzzled look on his face. That night, I had the strangest dream that I was in Carl's place, hiding inside of the outpost at the Void Lair. Big Jenny was standing outside of it, right in front of the glass, just staring at me. I couldn't move. All I could do was stare at her. I suddenly felt a hand on my shoulder, and I was able to move again. I looked over to see a very disheveled-looking Carl staring back at me. "You shouldn't be here, nor should your friends," he said, looking behind me. I turned to look and saw Story and Deb standing there, confused. "This is my burden to bear, and I will bear it alone." I suddenly woke up in a cold sweat, terrified. I went to the bathroom and splashed some water on my face, then went to the kitchen where I saw Debbie making some tea. She's been living with me for the past couple days, and if you're wondering how she is able to interact with things in my kitchen, well, somehow being in the same place for long enough with a magician allows them to interact with things in that area without supervision. I'm still trying to figure out how the black magic virus works. "I thought you didn't need to eat or drink," I said as I pulled a stool up to the counter. "I don't need to, but I can," she said, putting a cup in front of me. "Did you have the dream too?" she asked, taking a sip of her tea. I nodded yes. "What do you think that was?" "I don't know. Maybe something happened with him and Big Jenny and they're both stuck there," I said, taking a sip. "Do you think we're safe?" she asked. "I don't know. I guess if we fall asleep and we don't show up there again, then we might be fine," I said. "What did Carl mean by his burden to carry?" she asked. "Debbie, I don't know. That's the problem with a lot of these tapes. You typically come out with more questions than answers," I said, taking another sip of tea. "Well, a magician gave you this tape, right? Why don't we ask him?" she said. "If I had a way to do so, I would, but there was no address on the tape or note, and all I have is a name. You are more than welcome to go searching yourself for him or her for it, or whatever Carthen is. But I say that if we go to bed over the next couple of nights and nothing happens, we leave it be. Most of the time there's nothing we can do anyway," I said. There was a long period of silence as we sat there drinking our tea. "I just feel bad for the guy, you know?" she said. "Yeah?" I said, letting out a sigh. "Do you ever feel guilty for the people you watch in the tapes?" she asked. I sat there, staring down at my cup. "Sometimes. I do, sometimes. The first real dangerous tape we ever experienced was called Traveling Up the Pipeline, and it was a guy just trying to escape a cave he was trapped in. Turns out the cave was connected to my previous watch partner's body. We had to pull him out of her mouth, and it took a good minute to just get him out. When he finally got out, we had to stop his camera to keep other things from getting out, and in doing so, he disappeared, leaving only his camera on the ground. I tried watching the tape back, but it was blank. The man was just trying to escape, and we couldn't save him. Hell, he may have already been dead, but that doesn't stop it from haunting my mind." The room went silent again as we both stared at our tea. I'm not sure how much time passed, but eventually Debbie got up and placed a hand on my shoulder. "If you ever need to talk about anything, I'm right here," she said before walking back to her room. "It's been a couple days since we watched the tape, and I've watched a few more times to test something. Every night after watching the tape, I no longer have that dream. Carl must have done something to keep us from getting stuck there. Story had also experienced the same dream, but hasn't since the first night. Debbie has tried to ask around about Carthen, but she hasn't gotten anywhere yet. Story hasn't found anything on Ashlyn either, but he's still looking. My previous watch partner is still on break. At this point, I'm not sure if she will come back, but I don't blame her. My friend in the hospital is making a good recovery and should be discharged by next week, but he will need another week or two to take it easy. Also, he said it was okay to use his name. He's called Scott. Anyway, if anyone has any cursed tapes that they want to get rid of, feel free to message me. I will gladly take them off your hands. I have a wood safe filled with cursed VHS tapes that are to never be watched by anyone, ever. Only because I have watched them and have faced and or witnessed the consequences. This post is a warning for the following VHS tape known as Stockholm Police Department 25/8/2004. Silver Arrow Incident Copy. As it states in the title, this is a copy of the tape, which could mean that there are others out there. If you find one, read this because even a copy is a level 2. The name of the tape is very long and is on a blank Maxwell tape. The runtime is about 1 hour and 23 minutes. Securing the tape is not needed as it has no drawing effects that make you want to watch it. However, if you need to secure it, keep it in a wooden box with no metal hinges or locks. Metal only amplifies the energy of a tape. Finally, this tape has a danger level of 2. See part 1 for the danger guide on cursed VHS tapes. My cursed object friend found this one on a recent trip to Canada and decided to ship it to me. She didn't feel much energy coming off of it, but it was enough to warrant buying it and sending it my way. This one was weird due to the fact that it is a police tape and I was curious, so I looked up what I could about what happened on August 25th in Stockholm in 2004, but I couldn't find anything. One thing that did come up is Silver Arrow Incident, but the only thing that popped up was a legend of a ghost train that haunts the Stockholm metro. Thinking that might be what the tape is about, I went in expecting a ghost train. Boy, was I wrong. Still rolling with the new watch crew, I had Debbie as my watch partner and story on the kill switch. I told everyone to expect something with a train and pressed play. However, what first popped up was a title card, much like Tube's Demonstration 1, and it read as follows. This footage has been requisitioned by the Dark Moth Corporation for official use only. Any unauthorized viewings of this recording will result in up to 10 years of imprisonment. The following tape has been deemed safe to watch under the appropriate safety precautions and is to be sent back to the archivist once finished. Wasn't the Dark Moth Corporation mentioned in the last tape too? Debbie asked. I paused the video. It was, Story said. Hey Story, can you do me a favor and see if you can find anything on the Dark Moth Corporation while we're watching this? I asked. You got it, boss, he said as he pulled out his phone. I pressed play on the video again, then waited a few seconds for the title card to fade away. What proceeded for the next hour was home videos of a woman that I believe was called Julia and her roommate Nova, also a woman. They spoke Swedish, so I could only guess what they were talking about. 4 other people show up throughout the video as well. They seem to be friends with the roommates, but I only managed to get the names of 2 of the friends. One was Liam, and another was Elias. Both men. There were 2 other women as well. Closer to the last 20 minutes of the video is when things begin to get weird. In contrast to the prior footage of them having fun and hanging out at bars and at different houses and apartments, the 6 were sitting in camping chairs around a lantern on a station platform that was half outside, half in, at night. They all looked a little tired, but they were still having a fun conversation with lots of laughing. After a while, the laughter died down and the conversation became a little more serious. I paused the tape there and had an idea. I took out my phone and pulled up Google Translate. It's not the best, but it's all I had at the time. The following dialogue is my reasonable approximation of what they were saying. So, I heard that when the train passes through a station, there's no lights on. There isn't even a driver. And if it does stop and you get on, you are never seen again, the blonde-haired woman said. She was one of the unnamed ones. The other one with no name had black hair. Well, I heard that if anyone does get on, they are not seen for a week or a month. But when asked, they just say they got off the train, Liam said. I heard it is a one-way ticket to hell, Nova said. The whole group went quiet. Well, that was dark, Elias said. Personally, I don't think anything is going to happen, Julia said. What makes you say that? The black-haired woman said, well, I did some research and there's no proof that any of the sightings are legitimate. Plus, the Silver Arrow in question was at one point a real train that was taken out of service in 1996, Julia said. Well, if you think that it's bullshit, then why are you here? The blonde woman asked. I'm not saying it's bullshit. I'm just saying that if we see a train, it will probably just be a normal green train testing the tracks for abnormalities or something. Plus, you wanted to record it if we see it, and I am the only one with a camera, Julia said. Julia makes a point. It is just a legend after all, Liam said. And why are we here, Liam? The blonde woman asked. Because not all legends are fake, and if we do not see anything, then we hang out and have a good time. Win-win, he said. They all laughed to themselves a little before it went silent again. I have a question. What are we going to do if we do see it, hypothetically speaking? The black-haired woman said. There was another pause as everyone looked at each other. I'm getting on, Nova said. They all looked at her like she was crazy. Are you not afraid of what might happen? The black-haired woman asked. Nova shrugged her shoulders. I am the only one without a job and a place of their own. I think I can risk my life for an adventure, she said. There was another pause before Elias burst out laughing. Hell, if we see it, I'll join you, he said. One by one, they all agreed to get on the train if it showed up. The footage then cut to a shot of the station platform facing down the tracks. A couple of their friends were standing down the way, pointing at a distant light that was coming closer. Julia could also be seen in front of the camera. As the light got closer, the train began to form behind it. A giant, pale, elongated head made up the first car. Its eyes acted as lights. Instead of wheels, it had a series of legs that carried it like a millipede. The 7 cars behind it were a series of giant, conjoined heads that laid on their sides. The mouths were the train car doors. The sound it made were indistinguishable from a normal train as it screeched to a halt. There was a release of pressure out the nostrils of the faces as their mouths opened like train car doors. Some of the friends began walking in, so Julia walked over to grab her camera. By the time she had gotten behind the camera, all of her friends besides Nova had entered. What the fuck? Julia said before smacking the side of the camera, possibly thinking it was a glitch and that hitting it would fix it somehow. What's wrong? Nova yelled as she began walking over to her. Guys, get out of the train. Julia yelled as she ran towards the car everyone had entered. Nova passed by the camera, then screamed. The mouth suddenly closed and Julia made sure to stay a good distance away from it. Nova picked up the camera and began running towards Julia. The sound of metal creaking and crumpling emitted behind Nova as Julia screamed and pointed behind her. Nova swung the camera around behind her and caught the long head of the front train car raising up and bending back to face them. The light beams coming out of its eyes narrowed as one focused on Nova and one on Julia. It suddenly opened its mouth and let out a huge, aggravated scream that sounded like a train horn blaring out, its legs skittering underneath its exposed undercarriage. Its open mouth revealed several moving components, almost like an engine. Julia and Nova could also be heard screaming. The long head closed its mouth and growled at them before quickly realigning itself on the tracks and taking off down the train platform. The camera was suddenly dropped as Nova could be heard hysterically crying. The tape cut off there. What the actual fuck? Debbie said. It was silent. I wasn't sure how to comprehend what I just watched. Most of the tapes we had watched up to that point had some sort of fantastical setting, or weren't accessible places to begin with or something. But the fact that this happened in a metro station in Stockholm, a place that I can very easily get to if I wanted, made me feel extremely uneasy. You know what? Let's just not focus on that for a second, Story. Do you have any info on the Dark Moth Corporation? Debbie asked. Was the tape really that bad or something? Story asked. I don't want to talk about it. If you want to watch it later, that's fine, but you're better off not. Anyway, do you have anything? Debbie asked. Story looked at us, confused for a moment before going back to his phone. No. I haven't found anything official other than some conspiracies in a forum about organizations that are hiding something. But the only thing on that forum is a mention of a dark moth facility in Vancouver, Canada. There is no other mention of anything else, he said, putting his phone away. Okay. Would you mind looking into your other sources to see if you can find something? I asked. Yeah, I can do that. Was the tape really that bad? He asked. I think I might have a permanent fear of trains now, so yes, Debbie said. It's been a few days since I watched the tape, and I still can't get the image of that train or whatever it was out of my head. Every time I see a train online or in a show, I begin to freak out and have a panic attack. I really hope that goes away eventually. Story managed to find something about the Dark Moth Corporation through his sources. It wasn't much, but from what he could gather, it was some sort of government agency. However, something happened and it ceased existing in 2005. That's all we have so far on that matter. He did, however, manage to get a little bit of info on Ashlyn. He hit me with a bunch of information that I've never heard of before, so I'll try to make sense of it the best I can. Ashlyn is more than likely a human Torpatoa. According to Story, a Torpatoa is a type of creature that is spiritual in nature, like a unicorn or fairies, but exists on the same level a cryptid would, like Sasquatch or Mothman. A Torpatoa has many different forms. It's typically its own subtype of animal, and apparently one of the variations can create offspring with humans. Story didn't go into how, but I don't want to know either. Now, a Torpatoa, again, according to Story, fits the description of Ashlyn from what I told him, and apparently this doesn't match up with how she is able to be in my head. A Torpatoa is a physical creature with spiritual capabilities, but it's still tied to its own body, so that means she either has a physical body somewhere, or somehow the energy caught in her tape was so strong that it is able to create its own entity outside of the original. Long story short, the actual Ashlyn might be out there, and the Ashlyn in my head might be a copy that is trying to get enough energy to maintain a form outside of my head. So now the question is, how much more energy does she need to leave my head for good? And will the other Ashlyn be a problem? This is all speculation, of course. Story is going to do more research and get back to me, but right now, that is the running theory. In other news, Debbie stopped looking for Carthen, and will wait for another tape from him to show up. My previous watch partner has finally decided to come back, and she has said that I could use her alias name, so from now on she will be called Helena. Scott has been discharged from the hospital, and is taking at least one more week off before he comes back. What the hell have I gotten myself into? Anyway, if anyone has any cursed tapes that they want to get rid of, feel free to message me. I will take them off your hands. I have a hardwood safe filled with cursed VHS tapes that are to never be watched by anyone, ever. Only because I have watched them and have faced and or witnessed the consequences. This post is a warning for the following VHS tape known as Bunker A2. If you find another copy, destroy it for the love of God. I only survived because of Ashlyn. This tape is another level 5. The name of the tape is Bunker A2. It's on a blank tape with no discernible marking to indicate who manufactured it, but it has the name on the front of it. There is no concrete runtime, but it is at least 15 minutes. I recommend destroying it with fire, or at the very least, encase it in a hardwood box with no metal attached. Metal only amplifies the energy of the tape, and bury it somewhere. Finally, this tape is a level 5. I found this tape stuck in a wall. I will explain. I was at a friend's house and he noticed that there was a patch of drywall that was slightly different than the drywall around it. He was renovating anyway, so he decided to open it up and check it out. What was inside was a small shoebox, and in that was the tape. I asked him if I could take it, and he said sure. just as long as I told him what was on the tape when I watched it. The following weekend, I got the watch party together, this time consisting of my old watch partner Helena sitting next to me, Debbie sitting in a recliner next to the couch, and Story outside the door on the kill switch. I put the tape in and pressed play. It starts off with a larger man talking into the camera. He's bloody and covered in some sort of black dirt. To anyone who finds this tape, I didn't make it out. I bought my friends some time, but I don't know if they made it. I'm fairly certain that I'm going to die, so I'm leaving this message. If you find this, it might already be too late, but if the generator is off, then you might have a chance. This whole place is alive, and I think the power generator is its heart. Keep it off, and if it's on, turn it off. The camera suddenly cuts to a shot of a man and woman standing in front of a metal door on the side of a cave wall. Floodlights are spread around the ground, lighting up the area. Is the camera rolling? The man asked. Yep, we're rolling. The man behind the camera said. He sounded like the man we first saw, so I guess the cameraman filmed over the first part to get his message across. Okay. The man in front of the camera took a second to compose himself. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Jason. This is my friend Jenny, he said, pointing to the woman next to him. And the man behind the camera is Todd. A hand came out from behind the camera and gave a thumbs up, then went away. Growing up, my grandfather would tell me horror stories of lost German bunkers from World War II up in the Scottish Highlands. It sounds stupid, I know, but he was sure that they were an actual thing. Recently, I've been thinking about it again, and I decided I would try and find them. So I packed my bags from Seattle to Scotland and began looking with my two friends here. And only after 1 week of searching, we found one of them, Jason said, moving to the side to reveal a black stamp on the door marked A2. The camera cuts again as Jason and Jenny are wearing heavier clothes and carrying flashlights. Respirators are strapped to their hips. Okay, for the first time since World War II, I present to you one of the lost German bunkers, Jason said as he pulled the door open. It made a loud, high-pitched screech as it scraped against the ground. Coming from the TV itself was a cold breeze that spread throughout the whole room. Hold on. Pause the video for a second. Helena said. I walked up to the VCR and paused it. This already feels like a high-level tape. I'm not sure I'm ready to jump back into a high-level tape right off the bat, she said. That's fair. You can leave if you need to, I said. Yeah, I'm sorry. I just want to ease my way back into it, and this feels like jumping off the deep end, she said as she stood up from the couch. I walked her over to the front door, but it was locked, which was weird because we were locked on the inside. I asked Helena to check different windows to see if they could open, but every one of them was locked tight. Eventually, Debbie came looking for us. Are you guys good? She asked. Well, you see, Helena suddenly cut me off. We're locked in, she said. What? Debbie asked. None of the doors and windows will open, I said. Oh, well, this could be bad, Debbie said. Hey, guys? Story yelled from the watchroom. What's wrong, Story? Debbie yelled. She's here, he yelled. She? Debbie asked. It took me only a second to figure out what he meant by that, and began running back to the watchroom. Debbie and Helena followed behind me. I turned the corner to see Story standing in the doorway, looking inside. He saw me and stepped to the side so I could come in. There, leaning against the opposite wall, was Ashlyn. She stood there with her eyes closed in a long black coat, a gray t-shirt, and dark blue eyes. Ashlyn? I asked. Her eyes opened, already pointing towards me. You really picked a bad tape, she said. Yeah, I can tell. Why are you choosing now to show up? I asked. Well, let me give you all a lesson. Except you, Story. You should already know, she said as she leaned off the wall and stood up straight. Her head was only a few inches from the ceiling. I need energy to maintain a physical form, of which I don't have a lot of at the moment. Suzuka only filled 2 of the 10 slots. She said. Slots? I asked. Ashlyn took her hand out of her pocket and showed us her nails. On her index and middle finger were 2 glowing orbs, one red and one yellow, the same colors as Suzuka's eyes. 2 slots is barely enough to create a physical form, but whatever's on this tape has made an energy field that has taken over the entire house. I can use that energy to manifest in the real world, she said, putting her hand back in her pocket. Well, can't we just take the tape out or kill the power or something? Debbie asked. I don't think you understand what I said. This tape has already taken over the house. I'm fairly certain the only reason why we aren't seeing any further progression of the possession of this house is because you paused the tape, keeping whatever's in there from coming out even more, she said, pointing to the TV. That, and I've already tried to cut the power, but nothing happened, Story said. Okay, what do you suggest we do then? Helena asked. Continue watching the tape, and I'll deal with whatever comes through. That, and I know Story has a gun, Ashlyn said, pointing to him. We all looked over to Story in surprise and shock. A worried expression crept across his face as his eyes darted to each of us. It's a curse item. I use in case of emergencies, he said, reaching into an inner pocket in his coat and pulled out what I recognize as a Luger P08 from growing up playing Call of Duty, but it looked weird. There were a couple things about it that made it look off, but he put it back in his coat before I could get a closer look. Debbie, Helena, and I looked at each other, confused on what to do next before we looked at Ashlyn. What are you looking at me for? The sooner we deal with the tape, the sooner we get out of danger, she said as she leaned back against the wall. Everyone but Ashlyn looked at each other, then shrugged. I went and pressed play on the tape. Jumping back into it, Jason and Jenny were looking through the entrance down a long corridor. At the very end was a staircase going down. Well, I wasn't expecting that, Jason said as he entered the hallway. I don't smell mold or mildew, or at least not yet, so we might not need the respirators for a while, he said. They all walked further into the corridor towards the stairs. Jason ran his hand along the wall, then checked his fingers. No chipping or residue. The paint is in good condition. This place must have been airtight, he said as he took some sort of small square device from his front coat pocket. The air quality is normal, but I'll keep an eye on it just in case, he said as he put it back in his pocket. Jason and Jenny stopped in front of the stairs and looked down, shining a flashlight. Well, that's not the least bit ominous, Jenny said. Todd, get a shot of this, Jason called. The camera moved past him and looked down the stairway. It must have been at least 60 or 70 feet down. The camera suddenly cuts for a second to a shot of Jason's lower body sticking out of the ceiling of a hallway, with several arms reaching out of the walls reaching for him. The scene was on screen for maybe 3 or 4 seconds before it cuts back to Jason and Jenny walking through a hallway. Something grabbed Ashlyn's attention during that scene as she looked around for a second before placing her hand on the wall and closing her eyes. Everything okay, Ashlyn? I asked. She put a finger to her lips. Ignore me and keep watching, she said. I was worried, but I really couldn't do anything else, so I kept watching. Some time had passed since the last cut, and I wasn't sure what was going on, other than they were walking to something. The flashlight they were using was having trouble illuminating the hallway. It only went half as far as when they first entered. Eventually they came up to a metal door with a sign that said, Achtung, with a symbol of a man being shocked by lightning. This must be the generator, Jason said. Are you sure this will even work? Jenny asked. Jason reached for a pair of rubber gloves that hung on a hook next to the door. Well, everything else in this bunker seems to be in good condition. Might as well try, he said, slipping on the gloves. I'll be back in a second, he said before opening the door and closing it behind him. A few seconds pass as Jenny and Todd are waiting outside the door before she turns to him. "Does this feel weird to you?" she asks. "In what way?" Todd asked. "Well, I mean, we found a lost German bunker in Scotland in what looks like pristine condition," she said. "Well, when you put it that way, yes, it's very weird," Todd said. The lights in the hallway suddenly snapped on. Jenny looked surprised as she turned off her flashlight. "No way that actually worked," she said. Todd panned the camera up to the lights, then down the hallway, and just for a second a gray woman, the same color as the walls, appeared far down the hall before melting into the floor in an instant. Jenny, did you see that?" Todd asked. "See what?" she asked. The camera suddenly cuts again to footage of Jenny on her knees, yelling and reaching towards the camera from outside the bunker entrance looking in. The camera is slowly overtaken by the same painted concrete, as it's encapsulated in its entirety. Every sound is muffled, but the camera manages to switch to night vision to reveal several slits in the concrete. In unison, they all open to reveal emerald green eyes. There's a loud squeal before it cuts back to Jenny and Jason as they're running down another hall. A siren is blaring at consistent intervals. Ashlyn quickly yanked her hand away from the wall. "Everyone in the center of the room now. Stay away from the walls," she said, moving to the middle of the room. We all quickly got up and huddled near Ashlyn while she took off her coat. Rocky protrusions bulged out of her arms as the exhaust tubes grew out of the top of her head. "What the fuck?" Debbie asked. "Long story. Don't worry about it," Ashlyn said, her eyes quickly changing to a multitude of colors. Story had taken his gun back out and kept it pointed down. I caught a good look at it and confirmed that it is a Luger POA, and later learned that it is an artillery Luger from World War I. Creaking sounds began to quietly emanate from every wall around us. "Ashlyn, what's going on?" I asked. "Just stay away from the walls, and if I say run, you run," she yelled. I wasn't paying attention to the tape for so long that, when I looked at it again, I saw Jason and Jenny walking down more stairs, but the footage cuts again to Todd being thrown into a blob of writhing flesh. He lands on it and starts trying to get off, but the flesh begins to latch on and melds his body to it. The screams as his body is stretched out and absorbed until he's nothing more than a patch on the flesh mass. The blob then moves closer as the camera remains still. It gets right up to it, then begins to physically spill out of the TV. "Run!" Ashlyn yelled as black and white tubes shot out of the bulges from her arms at the blob. Story was the first to run out, leading the way with his gun pointed forward. We all ran behind him. "Where are we supposed to go?" Helena asked. "I don't know, but she told us to run, and she might be the only one who can save us," I yelled. We ran into the hallway outside the watchroom, which had warped into a long corridor with weird bulges coming out of the walls. An alarm blared from somewhere. I wasn't sure where. Cracking sounds rattled behind us as I glanced back and saw several arms sticking out of the walls reaching for us. "Do not stop running," I yelled as I ran past Story. However, this proved my worst idea ever, as something surfaced from the floor and grabbed my legs. And in one fell swoop, I was pulled into the ground. Everything went dark. The only thing I could see was shadows moving in a massive void as I was floating in. The sounds of men screaming echoed throughout as I tried to get a grasp as to what was going on around me. "Valen!" Ashlyn yelled from somewhere. Suddenly I felt something wrap around my body and pull me backwards. I looked down to see a large white tube around me. "I don't think so," a Scottish voice said. A large gray hand came out of nowhere and grabbed me by the legs. "Let go of them, you concrete freak!" Ashlyn yelled. A giant multicolored arm came out of the darkness and punched a giant white face that emerged from the void. The view of the area began to widen as a giant Ashlyn in her other form began fighting a giant gray woman. The gray woman let go, but Ashlyn kept a firm grip on me with one of her arm tubes and held me away from the fight. Ashlyn was ruthless in her attacks. The gray woman would try to block with her arms, but Ashlyn would push right through. The gray woman kept blocking until she found an opening and headbutted Ashlyn in the nose. Ashlyn was knocked back enough to give the gray woman some time to get some punches in towards her torso. She also got one last hit to her forehead, knocking Ashlyn back even further. "Give up. You're in my world now," the gray woman taunted. That seemed to only piss Ashlyn off more, as her eyes changed from a multicolored to a dark red everywhere. Her teeth rapidly sharpened as she charged the gray woman. The gray woman threw a punch, but Ashlyn caught it in her mouth, biting her hand off and swallowing it. The gray woman recoiled in pain, but Ashlyn was still charging and plunged her teeth into her neck. Red blood poured from the gray woman's neck as the red tubes from Ashlyn's torso sprang out and lashed onto the gray woman's body. The tube around me let go as another one engulfed me, and everything went black again. The next thing I knew, I was waking up on the couch next to Helena. Debbie was pressed out in the recliner, and Story was slumped over on the ground next to the kill switch. "Susan is gone. You don't need to worry about her anymore," Ashlyn said. I looked around, but I couldn't see her. "Who's Susan? Where are you, Ashlyn?" I asked out loud. "I'm in your head, but I now have enough energy to talk with you, with no problems." And Susan was the name of that concrete bitch. But she is no longer a problem. And don't worry, everything's fine minus the mental trauma they'll probably have for the rest of their lives. "Oh. Okay, I guess. I assume you absorbed her? How many slots did that leave left?" I asked. 3, she said. "And what will you do when you have all 10 filled?" I asked. "Hey, who the hell are you talking to?" Debbie asked, waking up from the recliner. "Hold on," I said, motioning her to wait a minute. "What's going to happen when all 10 slots are filled?" "Then I'm free," she said. Everyone's okay. Turns out everyone got caught and sent into that weird screaming void, but they were only floating around in it for a while. The house is back to normal. At the very least, I haven't found anything out of the ordinary. Ashlyn can talk to me now, but she doesn't most of the time. She hasn't really talked to me since that incident. When I took the tape out, it disintegrated into dust, so fortunately, I don't have to worry about it again. And Story did some research and actually found Jenny and got in contact with her. After some prying, he got her to tell him what happened. In short, they went to Scotland to find one of the bunkers. They found one, went inside, and turned on the generator. After that, the bunker locked them in. All of the German writing in the bunker turned to English. Green eyeballs began popping up everywhere. They learned that the bunker was used to test experiments and found the override. Well, the bunker didn't like that, so it tried to kill them on the way out. Todd sacrificed himself to stop a fleshy blob from chasing them. And Jason almost made it out, but was grabbed by Susan, who had control over the bunker and pulled him into the floor, while Jenny watched from the entrance of the bunker. She won't tell us where the bunker is, and I'm fine with that. But that doesn't explain how the tape came to be in the first place, which makes me think that this tape is somehow a projection of the bunker itself. I don't know. I really have no answers for this, and neither does Story. But if you find a tape with the name Bunker A2, destroy it immediately. If anyone has any cursed tapes that they want to get rid of, message me and we'll figure out a way to take them off your hands. I have a hardwood safe filled with cursed VHS tapes that are to never be watched by anyone, ever. Only because I have watched them and have faced and or witnessed the consequences. This post is a warning for the following VHS tape known as The God of TV. There might be other copies, so just in case, read this. It is a level 2. The name of the tape is The God of TV, and it's on a blank TDK tape. The runtime is about 10 minutes. You do not need to secure this tape, but if you want to keep it from curious minds, keep it in a wooden box with no metal hinges or locks. Metal only amplifies the energy of the tapes. Finally, I'm putting this tape as a level 2. See part 1 for the danger guide on cursed VHS tapes. This tape is another one from Carthen. It was delivered by the same magician as last time, and before it left, Debbie gave it a letter to take it back to Carthen. The tape also came with another note that reads as follows. Hello, Valen. I apologize if that last tape I sent you gave Debbie and you some grief. That was not my intent. I have, however, found another tape. I haven't watched this one, because I don't deal with gods. Not my forte, but I hope it'll be an interesting watch. Your friend, Carthen. That following weekend, I got the watch party together, with Scott finally joining us again. We had to move some things around. He is back on the kill switch outside the door. Helena is sitting next to me on the couch. Debbie is on the recliner. And Story brought his own camping chair until we can get another chair to put in the watch room. I put the tape in and pressed play. It started with the camera facing a teenager as he walked through a densely packed forest at night. There's a date stamp in the bottom right corner. May 1st, 1999. Alright, context for those who might find this tape later. I lost a bet with my friends and now I have to go and find a house in the middle of this forest and spend the night. It might be there, it might not. It's only a rumor. Kyle, Jordan, Ren, I hate you guys. If I get lost in the woods and this camera is the only thing you find, fuck you. Turning the camera off now. The kid said. The camera then cuts to black for a second before showing a clearing in the middle of the woods with a large house in the middle of it. The house looks old, but there's no signs of vandalism. Okay, I've been walking for about 2 hours now. I just stumbled upon this house in this field and I'm kinda weirded out. Especially because if you look down, he said as he pointed the camera down at the ground. He moved some of the grass with his foot and revealed a few cables. These cords are everywhere, and they're coming from that house. The camera cuts again to just outside the front door. The condition of the house looks good, but it is covered in dirt and grime. Well, I've checked the outside of the house and there's no broken windows or signs that anyone is broken in. But all of the windows are blacked out, so I really hope there isn't anyone living here. He said. He reached for the doorknob and slowly turned it until it clicked. He pulled it open and walked inside. It took a second for the camera to adjust to the darker interior. Once it refocused, all that could be seen were TVs in various states of disrepair, littered all over the place. There were stacks piled up against walls, damaged ones scattered along the ground, and wires everywhere. What the hell? He said. He looked around with the camera, panning to different stacks of TVs. Some of them were still on, but just displayed static. One looked like it was playing Fraggle Rock, but I couldn't get a clear view. He walked up to a few of the TVs and turned some of the knobs and pressed some buttons, but none of them worked. Alright, score for the creep counter. What's next? Is Scooby-Doo gonna come out running from a ghost? He said. From what I could gather, he must have been in the living room. I could see the kitchen in the distance when he panned in a certain area. All of a sudden, all the TVs that could still function turned on with a white flash, then turned to static, then turned off again. Yeah, no bet's worth this. He said as he turned to the door, when, out of nowhere, a woman could be heard screaming from further in the house. Who's there? He yelled. Help me. The same voice said. It sounded disjointed. Like it was skipping. What the hell? He said as the camera pointed down to around his waist. The cable slithered its way up around his leg. He dropped the camera on the ground facing his leg. He struggled to get the wire off before it tightened and pulled his leg out from underneath him, falling on his back. He was then dragged across the floor and grabbed the camera at the last second. He pointed it where he was being dragged. His breathing was intense, but he wouldn't scream. He was being dragged through what seemed like endless hallways with TVs on either side. The closer he got to wherever he was being pulled to, the newer the TVs looked. Most of them were on, playing either the news, cartoons, or TV dramas, but every now and then, there was an eye on a screen that would track the kid. Eventually, he was pulled into a large room. TVs of all shapes and sizes littered the walls, floors, and even the ceiling. Each TV had a cable attached to it that led to the center of the room, where a woman hung by the wires as they stuck out from everywhere on her body through a white nightgown. The woman clutched a small, portable TV in her arms. Several small TV towers stuck out from the top of her head through her hair, and her eyes were glazed over with static. The kid was lifted up in front of the woman's face. "You aren't the caretaker. Caretaker," the woman said. The kid couldn't speak. All we could hear was heavy, panicked breaths. The woman's head movements were jagged and fast as she talked. "Wait, just a moment," she said as she focused on the camera instead of the kid. The small TV in her hand suddenly flicked on as it showed a view from my TV looking at all of us watching the video. The only people to not show up was Scott, who was in the hallway, and Debbie. I leaned in closer in my seat to try to make out the image of us better, only to see that it was copying my movements. "Is this what I become?" the woman said as the cable let go of the kid's leg, letting him fall to the floor. The kid fell to the ground with a crash and the sound of a TV screen breaking. He pointed the screen back up to the woman, quickly crawling backwards towards the entrance of the room. The woman hung there, with an expression of defeat on her face. She hung her head down as sparks of electricity jumped from the different tiny towers on her head. Suddenly every screen flashes red before turning off. Her small TV she's holding turns to static. "Leave here and never speak a word of this," the woman said. Slowly the screens turned back on to show different shades of blue and gray. The tape cuts there. "Did we appear on her TV?" Helena asked. "We did," I said. "I didn't, so I'll leave you guys to figure that one out," Debbie said as she got up and walked to the door. "Thanks, Debbie. Real team player," Helena said. "No problem. Let me know if we're all gonna die," she said as she left the room. Helena rolled her eyes as she sulked into the couch. Story crossed his arms and looked down in contemplation. "What are your thoughts on this story?" I asked. "Something about this doesn't give off the feeling that we're in danger," he said. "I agree with Story." Ashlyn's voice suddenly came out of nowhere in my head. "Oh, now you chime in?" I said out loud. "What?" Story asked. "Sorry, it was Ashlyn. She's agreeing with you," I said. "Oh, I guess that's kinda comforting. Anyway, it feels like that woman used the camera to look at us or into the future and didn't like what she saw," he said. "Well, I mean the tape is called The God of TV, right?" Helena asked. "Yeah," Story said. "Well, think about it. When's the last time you actually sat down and watched TV?" she said. Story and I looked at each other for a moment before the situation began to click. I can only assume that she probably saw that the number of people who watch TV has gone down significantly. If we run off the theory that gods get their power from people believing in them and or using things that relate to them, she probably learned that her power is going to fade. And by the date stamp on the tape, she only had another 5 or 10 years left before her power faded significantly, she said. Both Story and I looked at each other again, finally seeing the possible bigger picture. Wait, so did we just watch the beginning of the fall of TV? I asked. Well, the internet only got better from there on out, so it wouldn't surprise me if we saw the beginning of the end, Helena said. But she saw us, and became aware of her, and seemed like she became extremely depressed. So my question is, did we make her aware of her end, or did we just kickstart the chain of events that's making TV slowly irrelevant? Story asked. The whole room went silent, until Scott spoke up from outside the door. Can anyone fill me in, please? he asked. Nothing else seemed to happen after that. In fact, the only reason this tape is a level 2 is because we showed up in the tape. So far there have been no other effects, but it's only been a couple days. Quite honestly, I'm kinda glad this was a level 2 after last week's tape. This is admittedly a little too taxing on me, but I have a feeling that Ashlyn won't let me stop until all 10 of her slots are filled. So I guess until then, I'm still watching tapes. We also told Scott about the magicians, just to clear up any confusion that anyone might have. If anyone has any cursed tapes that they want to get rid of, message me and we'll work something out. Addendum. This was supposed to be posted last weekend, but I ran into a problem with a magician. If you recall, the worm magician, in part 4, told Helena and I about some magicians just want to harm or kill humans. Well, I had an encounter with one shortly after this tape that caused me to have some time in the hospital. It was the day after we watched The God of TV, and I was writing this part when I felt like something was looking at me. I was in a coffee shop at the time. I know, I'm one of those people. And I looked out the window to see a man in a hoodie and jacket staring at me. As soon as I looked at it, it raised its fist and started punching the glass. The people next to the window were confused as to what was going on. That was the major clue that told me it was a magician. I quickly packed up my laptop and looked for the nearest place I could leave. But by the time I got my bag on, the glass had shattered. The other people in the coffee shop had freaked out and moved away from the now open window, giving the magician a clear way towards me. Thankfully, there were some tables in that way that created some distance between it and me so I could run past and out the front door. I ran down the sidewalk, not really sure what to do until I heard Ashlyn talking to me. "The next alley you pass, go down it. I have an idea," she said. The next alley I saw, I darted down. "Okay. Get about halfway down, then turn around and touch the ground," she said. "What?" I asked. "Just trust me," she said. Passing a dumpster, I got about halfway when I heard footsteps and rattling behind me. Not really sure what to expect, I stopped and turned around, touching the ground. A black mist expanded out from my hand towards the magician, but I looked up to see just in time to see a broken bottle being thrown at me. I put my arm up and ducked, but the broken part caught my arm and cut a gash into the side of it. The magician kept coming and must have not noticed the mist as it walked right into it. One of Ashlyn's tubes shot out and grabbed it by the torso. It only reacted for a second before it was picked up and slammed headfirst into the ground. The tube let go and retracted back into the mist before Ashlyn crawled out of it, standing there in her normal black coat attire, looking at the magician. The mist suddenly blasted outwards, creating a black box around the three of us, much like Suzuka did when she took over Helena. The magician was dazed for a moment before it managed to sit up. Ashlyn walked over to me with an intensity that made the magician stand up and try to run, but the box kept him in. I looked down at my arm and saw that it was bleeding heavily, but I didn't know if I should remove my hand from the ground or not, so I held it against my torso to try and stop the bleeding. I looked back up to see Ashlyn grab the magician by the neck and hold it up. "You stupid bitch. You can't kill me," it yelled, a smug but stressed look gleaming off its face. "And you?" she said, moving him closer to her face. "Don't realize what I'm capable of." The smug look fell as she rolled up one sleeve to let the tube slither out and grab its neck in place of her hand. She then rolled up her other sleeve as more tubes come out and grabbed the magician by the limbs. The exhaust tube sprouted from the top of her back, spraying some red liquid. "Wait, what are you doing?" it yelled. "Getting rid of a problem," she said as red tubes came out of her torso and stabbed into the magician's body. In one swift motion, the magician quickly dried up into a weird gray mass, clothes and all, until it became a gray leather material that she dropped onto the ground. The red arm tubes retracted for a moment before black liquid spewed from the exhaust tubes as she hunched over. A few moments later, the black tubes also retracted as she turned around and looked at me with relief, then shock. "Valen?" she said, running back over to me. The walls quickly dropped and the mist moved to just under her feet and a small trail from my hand. "Holy shit, you're pale," she said, touching my face. I moved my arm to show her the gash. I was so focused on what was happening in front of me that I didn't even realize how dizzy I was. She took off the sleeve of her jacket, then ripped a part of her t-shirt off and wrapped it around my arm. "Where's your phone?" she asked. "Front pocket," I said as my head began getting heavier. Ashlyn reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone, then placed her hand on my neck. "Take your hand off of the ground and apply pressure to your wound. Who lives closest to here?" "Scott," I said, taking my hand off of the ground and pressing against my gash. What happened after that was a little spotty, but I remember Scott showing up a few minutes later and Ashlyn filling him in on what happened, then both of them helping me to his car. Ashlyn disappeared back into my head when I got in his car. I got to a hospital and looked down at my arm to see that the piece of t-shirt was still there. I got checked into the ER. They cleaned the wound, stopped it from bleeding, stitched it up, and gave me a blood transfusion. I spent the next couple days in the hospital, then I was checked out. Scott came and drove me home, and when I got home, Ashlyn spoke to me for the first time since that incident. "Hey, I'm not really good at these things, but I wanted to say I'm sorry for letting you get hurt. I was more focused on the magician than actually trying to make sure you were safe. I'll try to be more aware of your condition if something like that happens again." "It's fine. You saved me regardless, and I already knew the dangers I put myself in. I'm just glad you were there to help," I said. "Don't worry. I got you," she said. "I'm gonna take one more day or two to rest before we watch another tape. Then we should be back on our regular watch schedule. I have a hardwood safe filled with cursed VHS tapes that are to never be watched by anyone ever. Only because I have watched them and have faced and or witnessed the consequences. This post is a warning for the following VHS tape known as The World as We Know It. There might be other copies, so read this before you watch it. It is a level 3. The name of the tape is The World as We Know It. It is a blank Sony tape with a runtime of about 45 minutes. Securing the tape isn't necessary, but if you want to keep it from curious minds, keep it in a wooden box with no metal attached to it. Finally, this tape is a level 3. See part 1 for the danger guide on cursed VHS tapes. This tape was sent to me by my cursed objects friend after finding it in a rummage sale that had an expansive VHS tape collection. She doesn't watch them, so she sends them to me. Although, before we sat down and watched it, I had an idea and asked Ashlyn if she could detect whether or not this was a high-level tape or not. She told me it wasn't a guarantee, but she could possibly give a rough estimate. She told me to grab it and hold it in my hands. A black mist emanated from my hands before going away. The energy from the tape is too low for it to be a real danger. I would say more than a 1, but no more than a 3. And that's pushing it, she said in my head. With that knowledge, I told the watch party what level of tape we might have based on Ashlyn's estimate. Everyone agreed to watch, so we got together and set up with Helena next to me on the couch, Debbie on the recliner, Scott out in the hall with the kill switch, and Story in a smaller recliner we got from Goodwill. I pressed play on the VCR and away we went. It opened on a news broadcast from the mid-90s or so, starting from the beginning. Everything seemed normal up until about the 30-minute mark when the broadcast was suddenly interrupted. The screen went black as the sound cut out. I thought that maybe my VCR broke until a lower pitch-shifted voice began speaking. "The world as we know it will not be the same. November 15th, 2014 will mark the beginning of the decline that will be reality's downfall. Although it will be a slow process, it is an inevitable one. What you are about to see is only a glimpse of what is to come in the future," the voice said. There was nothing for a couple seconds, just the blank screen. "Sounds like someone's trying to be edgy and hijack a TV station," Helena said. "Maybe. I said. Out of nowhere, the screen began flashing images at a rapid pace and my vision narrowed. Everything around me seemed to go dark as the TV sat in front of me. The images slowed down to a point where they weren't images, but videos. They seemed sporadic and random. In one of them, I saw the void layer with a team of people traveling through it and going to what looked like a long abandoned outpost 07. It switched to another video of a very tall woman with short purple hair. It wasn't Ashlyn. It was someone else. She wore a long-sleeved gray shirt, black jeans, and an old leather satchel. She sat on the rooftop of a large building overlooking a track field. It might have been a school. Next to her stood a man, late teens, with a black hoodie, blue jeans, and short black hair. A holster with a handgun was strapped to his thigh. "She's really dead, isn't she?" the woman said. The man looked down at the ground, thinking of something to say, or maybe he was trying to keep his composure. Admittedly, this isn't the first time she has died. It took her 6 months to come back from that, but she came back. Although the doc said there's no brain activity this time, and being stabbed through the eye probably has something to do with it, he said. "Do you think there's a chance then?" she asked. "I don't know," he said. The video then cut again to a clip I couldn't really believe at first. Ashlyn sat next to me on the couch of the watchroom. There was no mist. She wasn't holding on to me, so she must have had all 10 slots filled at this point. Across from us was Story. He looked much paler than normal, and his eyes seemed to have changed color from the normal brown to a light shade of blue. He stood there looking worried. "I'm not sure how to go about this. I don't know what the outcome will be, but I thought it would be best to do this as formally as possible," he said. "What do you mean? What's wrong?" I asked. "There's someone you should meet," he said. He looked towards the door. "You can come in now." The video began to fade, but the camera panned up to the entrance to the room to show Ashlyn walking in. So many different videos played in front of me that I only remembered a few of them, but the last one I remember was a woman sitting in a bedroom with no windows. Everything was some shade of either red, black, or brown. She sat in a chair facing the left of the room. Her left side profile was all I could see. She wore a black jacket with dark blue jeans and Converse shoes. Her shoulder-length hair was pink aside from her bangs, which were white. She stared off into the distance. Her red eye moved every now and then, so she must have been staring at nothing in particular. Another woman walked out from behind the camera and stood on the other side of the pink-haired lady. The other woman was identical to the one sitting down, but her clothing was slightly different. She had long black hair, and her eyes were yellow. She bent down and whispered something in the pink-haired girl's ear for a moment before pointing towards me. The pink-haired girl slowly turned her head towards me. Her right eye looked as if it had been stabbed through with a large blade. A long open wound sat vertically in the middle of it. I didn't notice it before, but her left arm was actually missing. It was just an empty sleeve. They both stared at me, as if waiting for something to happen. After a few seconds, the pink-haired woman went back to staring across the room. "They shouldn't be here. Show them out," she said. The woman walked towards the camera, but she didn't stop in front of it. In fact, there wasn't a camera there at all. I didn't realize it, but we were in the room. It wasn't a video. "I don't know how you got here, but it's time for you to go back to wherever you came from," she said as she raised her hand and placed her thumb on my forehead. Next thing I knew, I heard the tape in the VCR click to a stop and I was back in the watchroom again. Why was there so much flesh? Why? Why was there so much flesh? Helena said, wide-eyed and staring at the ground. "Did you see a spaceship made of flesh or flesh covering London?" Debbie asked. "There was a spaceship made of flesh?" Helena yelled. "Well, that answers my question." Debbie said. I stared at Story. He was dead silent. "Story?" I asked. He didn't move. Did you see what I saw? I asked, referring to the video of Ashlyn. I think we saw a couple of the same videos, but we all saw different things, Debbie said. Story, answer me, I said. Which one? He said quietly. The one with Ashlyn, I said. Which one? He said, turning to look at me. His eyebrows were furrowed with confusion, but his eyes were wide with worry. The one where you introduced someone to Ashlyn that looks exactly like her, I said. I saw it, but I don't know another Ashlyn. So I either haven't found her yet, or the video isn't real, because obviously my eyes are brown, not blue, he said. Yes, but Story, it's you. Anything can happen, I said. You think I don't fucking know that? He said, raising his voice at me. I saw plenty of other things on that tape that surely couldn't happen, but lo and behold, we live in a world where you have a monster woman in your head. There's ghost-like creatures that you can only see if one is around, and you're told about it by someone who can see it. And powerful entities live on analog tapes. He took a second to calm down and take some deep breaths before talking again. I am just as worried about this as you are, but I don't have the answers right now. We all took some time to calm down and talk about what we saw, and agreed that this was some sort of prophetic tape. As to whether it was accurate or not, we're not sure. The moment with Ashlyn hasn't happened yet, so until that happens, if it happens, we can't take anything we saw to be true. But if it is, the world will begin to change. I have a hardwood safe filled with cursed VHS tapes that are to never be watched by anyone, ever. Only because I have watched them and have faced and or witnessed the consequences. This post is a little bit different than normal. Originally there wasn't going to be a new part this weekend because half of the party is out of town, but then this happened. Debbie was out doing something and Ashlyn wasn't talking, so it was just me at the house. I was making sure that my VCR was working fine when I heard a knock at the door. I made my way over to the front door and looked through the peephole. I saw what looked like a bunch of tiny TV towers and power lines sitting on top of some hair. My first thought was a magician, but after my last encounter, I was a little wary. Ashlyn, are you there? I asked. Way ahead of you. If things go wrong, touch the wall, she said. I took in a deep breath, then unlocked and opened the door slightly. State your business, I said, not looking through the opening. Are you Valen? A female voice asked. Who wants to know? I asked. My name is Telly. We've technically never met before. She said. Wait a fucking minute. Open the door, Ashlyn said. Are you sure? I whispered. Just do it, she said, trusting Ashlyn. I opened the door slowly, only to stop when I realized who it was. It all came back to me when I saw a small TV in her arms that she held like a teddy bear. You are Valen, correct? Telly asked. A picture showed up on her TV of the watch party, and when we watched The God of TV. Yes, I said, not really knowing what to do. Was she there to kill me? Was she going to do something to me? May I come in? She asked. Sure, I said, moving to the side to let her in. Telly was shorter than I expected, standing maybe 8 inches to a foot shorter than me. She also wasn't wearing the nightgown she had on in the video. Instead, it was a blue jean jacket over a white tank top with torn light blue jeans. A very 90s look. She didn't wear shoes, however. She had long brown hair that was twisted in a low ponytail, and the tiny TV towers and power lines stuck out of the top of her head and through her hair. It was almost like a crown. The last piece was a pair of dark, tinted sunglasses that she wore over her eyes. May I ask what you're doing here? I asked, not really sure what to do. Well, I've run into a problem, she said, walking away from me and down the hallway towards the watch room. Her slight stutter sounded like old TV audio skipping. "And what's that?" I asked, following behind her. "I'm slowly, but surely dying," she said, walking through the door and into the watch room. "Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. But what has that got to do with me?" I asked. She stopped for a moment when she entered the room, then turned towards the VCR and jogged towards it before sitting down on the ground in front of it. "After I first saw you and learned of what was to become of me, the caretaker stopped showing up," she said. "Who's the caretaker? Maybe we can find them and get them to help you again," I said. "I don't know. They were always someone different, but after they stopped showing up, my power began to dwindle, and about 10 or 12 years ago, my influence over television vanished completely. That power went to the entity that controls the internet," she said, still staring at the VCR. "This entity wouldn't happen to be named Lane, would it?" I asked. "I don't know, but I get the reference. I've never met any of the other gods. We all exist separate from each other, born into the world through devotion. It was the caretaker's job to make sure we were taken care of, as long as we still had enough devotion to remain powerful. It somehow must have seen you at the same time I did, and decided to give up on me early." She went quiet for a second, taking her hand off of the VCR. "Are you okay?" I asked. I suppose that it was inevitable that I was going to die. I just didn't expect to be abandoned without warning. The god of the internet is slowly taking all of my power from me," she said as she stood back up and turned to me. "I can still draw power from television to live, but that is it. And that will draw empty. When I can no longer take power, I will cease to exist." "I have a feeling you're going to ask me for help with something," I said. "Yes, I want to see if I can use these tapes to maintain enough power to keep from dying," she said. "Wait a goddamn minute," Ashlyn said. I felt something emerge from underneath my lower pant leg. I looked down to see two hands reach out from it and force my leg up to take off my sock, then put my foot down. When it touched the ground, the black mist shot out and covered the ground. Ashlyn rose up from the center of it with her arms crossed. Telly seemed unfazed by all of this. "You are not stealing my only chance of obtaining a physical form," Ashlyn yelled. I am not trying to steal your chance from you. I am trying to stay alive. All I require are the tapes when you are finished watching them." "I don't even know if it'll work," Telly said. "Well, then what are you planning on doing with the tapes?" Ashlyn asked. Assuming I can feed off the power in the tapes, I will place it in my TV and absorb it. Hopefully the end result is the tape will be blank and I'll be able to keep myself alive," Telly said. Ashlyn released some tension in her shoulders, but she was still standoffish. "So, what you're telling me is you're still going to let us watch the tapes. Then afterwards you're just going to take it and scrub it clean, like a bottom feeder," Ashlyn said. "Well, I don't agree with the term, yes. This is my last-ditch effort to keep myself from dying. If this does not work, then I will have to come to terms with my death," Telly said, holding her TV tighter. Ashlyn stood there for a second before putting up a wall of black mist between Telly and us, then turned to me. "I don't know about this. She doesn't seem to be lying to us, but I'm not sure if giving her power is a good thing. Your thoughts?" she asked. Thought about it for a moment. "I think it wouldn't hurt to try. I feel partially responsible for what happened to her, so let's at least see if it will work. Even then, if it does, it might be a way to dispose of higher level tapes. However, if she does become a problem, do you think you can take care of her?" I asked. "As she is right now, not a problem, but depending on how powerful she gets, I may not be able to in my current form," When I have all 10 slots filled, I'll more than likely be able to take care of her no problem. Is that a guarantee? Or is that what you think? I asked. Ashlyn went quiet for a second. She looked off to the side. A slight look of worry crept across her face. Tell you what, I'm going to take a risk and let her try it. If it doesn't work, she goes on her way and that's that. If it does, we will figure out something from there. Okay? I asked. That's fine with me, but keep your socks off. If anything happens when she tries it, I want to be able to take care of it right away, Ashlyn said. She quickly sunk back down into the mist as it all dissipated away, leaving Telly and I standing there. We'll let you try it, but no funny business. If we see you try to do anything that would harm us in any way, Ashlyn will take care of you. Deal? I asked. I agree to these terms, Telly said. I went and grabbed a level 2 tape, something that would have enough energy to detect, but not enough to cause harm, and gave it to her. Telly took it and sat down in the middle of the watch room. She actually let go of her TV for the first time I've seen, placing it down in front of her. She reached up to her hair and pulled 2 black wires out of it and attached them to the TV, then took the tape and put it in. Telly's spine suddenly straightened up and her head jerked back, facing the ceiling. Even with her sunglasses on, I could see light shine out from her static eyes. She was silent and remained still for a couple minutes until her back gave out and she fell flat on the ground. Telly? I asked. Are you okay? She stuck her arm up and gave me a thumbs up, still lying on her back. Did it work? I asked. She raised her other arm up to give another thumbs up. I didn't notice it at first with how bright her eyes were, but I saw Ashlyn's black mist move back to my foot. She must have been ready to take her out at a moment's notice. I walked over and gave her a hand up. Alright, so what now? I asked. If I may ask to borrow a backpack and as many tapes as you are willing to give me, I will be on my way. I do not want to overstay my welcome, she said. Her stutter almost seemed to vanish. Yeah, I can do that, I said. I gave her a backpack filled with tapes that are a low enough level that they shouldn't interact with each other. Then she went on her way. I'll be honest, I'm not sure if it was a good idea, but it beats having a dying god as an enemy. Everyone should be back next week. I have a hardwood safe filled with cursed VHS tapes that are to never be watched by anyone, ever. Only because I have watched them and have faced and or witnessed the consequences. This post is a warning for the following VHS tape known as She's Made of Porcelain. It's a level 4. Destroyed immediately. The name of the tape is called She's Made of Porcelain, and it's on a blank Sony tape. The runtime is about 15 minutes. Securing the tape is necessary. Keep it in a wooden box with no metal on it. Metal only amplifies the energy of the tape. Finally, this tape has a danger level of 4. See part 1 for the danger guide on cursed VHS tapes. I found this tape while out antique store shopping with Debbie. She wanted to steal some things to decorate her room back at the house. The rule is, as long as it's not very expensive so it won't harm the business, I won't stop her. While shopping, I stumbled upon a wooden box with no metal on it, sealed with wax. Out of curiosity, I bought it. I knew it was some sort of cursed object, but I wasn't sure what. If it was a random object, I would send it to my cursed object friend. However, that wasn't the case. I brought it home and examined it to see if there were any markings, but there was no indication of any kind of written seal, just the wax, which was a sickly green, by the way. Taking a rather weird precaution, I had a bigger wooden box where I would put the smaller box in case anything happened. I chipped away at the wax while Debbie watched, and eventually enough came away where I could open it. Inside the box was just a VHS tape. Nothing special. That's it. Just a VHS tape. No cursed gold or jewels, or even a pouch full of bones. Debbie said, looking into the box. These tapes really do have a habit of finding you, don't they? Looks like it, I said. Yeah, before you know it, they'll start showing up on your doorstep. Oh, wait. They do, she said, walking away. The reality of the statement said it quickly. How long would it be before I got a tape every day? Where would I put them all? How would they interact with each other? How much danger would that cause? How many wooden boxes would I have to make and buy before I ran out of space? Valen, go ahead and touch the tape for me. I want to get an idea of what we are dealing with, Ashlyn said. I snapped out of my downward spiral and placed my hand on the tape. Her black mist leaked from my hand and onto it for a few seconds before returning back into my hand. Okay, this one is a little more powerful, but I still can't pinpoint exactly what level. I would say above a 3, she said. That weekend I got the watch party together, minus Story, who couldn't make it. I asked him to come over, but he said he was wrapped up in something. When I told him what the level was, he had a friend of his deliver a box to me before we started. Inside was a Luger he showed us during Bunker A2. It was weird to get a close-up image of it. It was heavier than I imagined, way more scratched up, and the words "blood for blood" were scratched into the back of the handle. It also came with a little note. Valen, be careful with this gun. If you look on the back, it says blood for blood. For some reason, this gun takes blood from your body to shoot in. But the upside is you don't need to reload. After about 20 shots or so, you'll lose 1 pint of blood. Be careful. Before firing it, pull the slide back. The 2 round pieces on the top to load a round into the chamber. Story. Well, if anything, it should help, Ashlyn said. A little while later, everyone else showed up. Debbie and Helena were with me in the watchroom, and Scott was just outside on the kill switch. I walked up and put the tape in, then pressed play. The screen was dark at first before someone took the lens cap off of the camera. What showed was a dark room with a woman strapped into a chair by the torso, ankles, and wrists trying to get free. Surrounding her were 5 women dressed in black dresses and ornate headpieces that obscured their faces. The one behind the restrained woman began speaking. Isabella Norello, your crimes against the Coven have been witnessed, she said. You idiots don't even realize the potential of the power your deity gives us, Isabella yelled. As punishment for the crime of taking another life without approval of the council, you are sentenced to imprisonment in one's own body, the woman said. We could take over the world with this power. You have no idea, Isabella yelled. None of the other women seemed to pay attention to her. Simultaneously, the women in black began chanting something I couldn't understand. It went on for a few minutes while Isabella screamed at them. After a while, the chanting got louder and patches of white began to develop on her that grew all over her body. Isabella screamed louder as the parts of her that had turned white no longer moved. From one final chant from the woman in black, Isabella turned fully white and frozen in a state of screaming. All of a sudden, the power went off in the watchroom. Scott, why did you hit the kill switch? Helena asked. I didn't. It turned off by itself, Scott said. Helena suddenly grabbed a gun from me and chambered around. I'm not getting possessed again, she said. Ashlyn, do you sense anything? I asked. She took a second to respond. There's no energy field created, but there is something in the house. It feels powerful. Be careful, she said. What did she say, Valen? Helena asked. Nothing's creating an energy field, so she can't manifest, but there is something in the house. Whatever it is, it probably cut the power manually, I said. Well, great. Now we have a witch hunt on our hands, Helena said. Debbie let out a short, fake laugh. I see what you did there, she said. What? Oh. Helena said, realizing what she said. Scott stepped inside the washroom and closed the door behind him, using the flashlight on his phone to illuminate the room. Okay, so there's something in this house that has cut the power. We have a gun, but there's 4 of us and Ashlyn. What's the plan? He asked. I've got something, Debbie said as she lifted her shirt and reached into the void in her torso, then pulled out a spiked baseball bat. What the fuck? Helena asked. Is that why you wanted nails and a hammer? I asked. I have no regrets. Onward, Debbie said, pointing her bat towards the door as she got up from the recliner. I've got you and Scott covered, Ashlyn said. Ashlyn's got us, I said to Scott. He gave a thumbs up before looking towards the door. Valen, take off your socks, Ashlyn said. Right, I said, taking off my socks. Everyone stared at me for a second in confusion. Easy access for Ashlyn to get out, I said. They all nodded understanding. Helena, who was already next to the door, opened it slightly and peeked through the crack. We waited until she opened the door further and checked the other side. We're good, she said as she opened the door completely. We walked into the hallway, making sure to be quiet so we could try to hear any movement in the house. The first place we went was the breaker box, which looked like somebody had punched a hole into it, then ripped a piece of it out. Other than that, the bottom floor was clear. We made our way upstairs and started going through the second floor. Hold on. I sense it. It's close by, Ashlyn said. It's close, I whispered. Everyone tensed up a little as we kept searching. I just realized, we have no idea what we are looking for, do we? Debbie asked. I'm gonna assume a lady in white, Helena whispered. Yes, but we don't know what she's made of or what she can do. The tape basically didn't give us any information, Debbie said. Helena turned around to Debbie. How about this? Whatever's not us, we... Helena was suddenly cut off by 2 arms that came out of the ceiling and grabbed her, then yanked her up into the ceiling, dropping the gun to the ground. Helena! I yelled. I didn't realize we were right under the entrance to the attic. Shit! Boost me up! Debbie yelled. I put my hands together and used them to help hoist Debbie up into the attic. Oh my god! Debbie yelled. I grabbed the gun up from the ground and turned to Scott. Help me up, I said. He did the same for me as I reached up and grabbed the edge of the entrance, then pulled myself the rest of the way. I wasn't even all the way up when I saw Debbie just standing there in utter shock as she looked at Isabella, sinking her teeth into the neck of Helena. Most of Helena's color had become white and frozen as she reached out towards Debbie and I, while Isabella's color returned to her. Debbie couldn't move, and by the time I got up, it was too late. When Isabella moved her mouth away from Helena's neck, there was no blood, not even teeth marks. Sorry to barge in unannounced like this, but being trapped in a porcelain body was getting on my nerves. It's so fragile. One wrong move and something could break, she said, giving a gentle push to Helena's body. It began to tip over and fall. I tried to move to catch her, but my feet wouldn't move. Ashlyn's mist came darting out from my feet towards her body. She didn't make it in time. She was just short of her. I felt my heart sink as I watched her body shatter in several pieces on the ground. Oops. My bad, Isabella said. Isabella looked down at her hand before using a nail on her other hand to make a deep cut. She let blood spill from her hand as it formed into a red blade. Right then. I assume you're going to try to kill me. So let's get this over with, she said before she dashed towards us. I saw Debbie flinch, then get ready to block while I chambered around into the Luger, but she dashed right over Ashlyn's mist. In an instant, a large tube jutted out of the mist and wrapped around Isabella's neck, stopping her in place. With lightning speed and sporadic twitching, Isabella was slammed all over the room, denting walls and crashing into old storage boxes. This went on for what felt like forever, until Isabella was swollen and covered in blood and bruises. Another tube came out and grabbed her by the legs and held her over the mist. Ashlyn began pulling, and as if Isabella could scream, I think she would. She was pulled so tightly that I could see her body begin to rip apart. Finally, a red tube shot out from the mist and struck through the middle of her, splitting her in two. After that, her two halves were dragged into the mist. The mist dissipated as it was just Debbie and I standing there in shock. I glanced down towards the shattered pile that was my friend. I walked over, then fell to my knees in front of it. I didn't know what to do. One of my best friends was just broken in front of me and I couldn't do anything about it. Debbie walked up behind me, placing a hand on my shoulder, and that's when I broke down. My actions caused the death of someone very close to me. To add insult to injury, Ashlyn only filled 2 slots from Isabella, which means she only has 1 left. Which means I need to watch more tapes in order to get her out of my head. As soon as she gets out of my head, I'm done with these fucking things. Scott's fine. Depressed as all hell, but alive. Debbie helped me bury Helena in the backyard, and since then she hasn't said much. She's still willing to watch the tapes with me until we get Ashlyn out of my head. Story's gone completely off the grid. He's not responding to texts, calls, or Discord. Ashlyn can manifest for a few hours at a time before losing form and receding back into my head. I'm not sure how many more tapes I need to watch, but let's hope it's 1. I have a hardwood safe filled with cursed VHS tapes that are to never be watched by anyone ever, only because I have watched them and have faced and or witnessed the consequences. This post is a warning for the following VHS tape known as The Flesh of the World. There probably aren't more copies, but just in case, read this. The name of the tape is The Flesh of the World, and it's on a blank Maxwell tape. The runtime is roughly 6 hours. Securing the tape is highly recommended. Put it in a wooden box with no metal hinges. Metal only amplifies the power of the tape. Finally, the tape has a danger level of 4. I received this tape in my P.O. box with no notes or return address. But there was a sticker on the tape that said, Property of the Dark Moth Corporation. The other 2 tapes I've gotten from them were further Void Layer exploration funding, and the other one with a really long name about the train in Stockholm. I figured it could possibly have an entity on it that could release Ashlyn from my head, so I chose to make it the next one we watch. I assembled what remained of the watch party together. Debbie sat next to me on the couch with her spiked baseball bat ready to go. Scott was outside on the kill switch. He brought his own machete. Ashlyn was going to wait to manifest until it was clear that something was going to happen so she could save power. I still had the Luger. I went up and put the tape in, then pressed play. There wasn't a title card like the last Dark Moth tape had. It just opened to an image of a dark conference. We sat there for a couple minutes, but nothing happened. It wasn't a static image. There was a light in the conference room that would flicker on and off every now and then. I'm gonna test something real quick. Debbie said as she got up and walked over to the TV. She stared at it for a second before putting her hand through it. Oh, that makes more sense. She said as she stepped through the TV and into the conference room itself. She looked around before looking down at the large table in the room, picking up a couple pieces of yellowed paper, then looking at them for a second. Seemingly out of nowhere, she slammed her bat into the table, then pulled it back out before stepping back into the watch room. She pressed stop on the VCR and walked back over to me. "What do you have?" I asked. Scott peered into the watch room, and when he saw that the tape wasn't going anymore, he came into the room. "A map and a rules sheet," she said. "What's going on?" Scott asked. "The tape is a gate of some sort," she said, flipping through some of the papers. and according to one of these rules, as long as the tape is playing, the gate remains open. If it closes, we're trapped on the other side until someone rewinds the tape and plays it again. It says the tape lasts 6 hours. Okay, but why did you impale the desk with your bat? I asked. I wanted to see if that world was consistent. If we have 6 hours until the gate closes, then I want to rewind the tape before any of us go in, she said. Wait, who said we were going to go in and explore? I asked. I did. It's clear that if we wait for something to show up, nothing will happen. At least not for a while. And I don't want to watch an empty room for 6 hours in case something happens, she said. It could be dangerous. I don't want anyone else to get hurt or killed, I said, raising my voice. Do you want Ashlyn out of your head or not? Debbie raised her voice back. For fuck's sake, both of you, Ashlyn said as she manifested from a cloud of black mist. If anyone's going to go in there, it'll be the 3 of us, she said, then turned to Scott. Scott, I need you to stay here in case anything else tries to come through. If it does, kill the power. Then wait 30 minutes to turn it back on. Hopefully anything that was there will be gone after 30 minutes. She turned back to Debbie and I. Debbie, I want you to come with me and be an extra set of eyes. Valen, I need you to at least stay in the conference room. If that gate leads to another world and we're on opposite sides and it closes, it could kill both of us because our link is severed. That raised some red flags in my head as I went down a rapid thought path. Hold on. Does that mean when you have enough power to leave my head, it could kill us both? I asked. What? No. I can control how I get out of your head. It'll be mostly painless. What I meant is, if the connection is suddenly cut, I don't know what would happen to the both of us. For all I know, you could be fine. Or you could die a painful death. I don't know and I don't want to risk it, she said. I looked at Scott, who seemed worried but reluctantly compliant. Then I glanced over to Debbie, who shrugged her shoulders. She looked like she wanted to go in and explore. She doesn't have much to lose, and in her words, I've already died once. I'll be fine. Fine. But you guys have to promise to me that we will all be careful, and as soon as we see something that we might not be able to handle, we turn back, okay? I asked. I think we'll be fine. But yes, I agree to those terms, Ashlyn said. We rewound the tape so we could have the full 6 hours, then went over some of the rules on the paper. In a quick summary, the rules basically say, don't interact with things that move, never go by yourself, always be prepared for anything. With all of those in mind, we played the tape again and walked through, bringing some flashlights with us. The conference room had one working light that was dim, and another light that would flicker every once in a while. There were whiteboards all over the walls, but most of them were empty besides some scribbles that could have been words once. There were some glass windows that had a view of a hallway. All of them were broken. Well, good news is that the holes from the nails in my bat are still in the table, which means the world doesn't reset when you rewind the tape, Debbie said. Good to know, I said. Ashlyn stood by the broken windows with her eyes closed. Okay, there is something here that I could possibly assimilate, but I can't get a clear direction of where it is, she said. Let's start looking, Debbie said, turning on her flashlight and stepping through one of the broken windows. I turned to look back through the TV at Scott, then gave him a thumbs up before following Debbie and Ashlyn. The hallway was in slightly worse condition than the conference room. Trash and paper littered the ground, while bullet holes filled the walls. A sweet scent lingered in the air, but I couldn't place it. What do you think happened here? Debbie asked. Well, the tape is called The Flesh of the World, so I'm going to guess flesh was involved, I said. Like that spaceship? Or London? Debbie asked. Once again, I didn't see that, so I don't know. I said, We all felt a gentle breeze go past us coming from ahead. We followed where it was coming from and found a hole that led to the outside. What the fuck? I said, looking at the outside. The sky was a shade of orange and a city laid before us. Giant flesh, growth plagued the size of buildings, and large intestine-like structures wiggled through the cityscape. Something was moving through the intestines, but I couldn't tell what, nor did I want to know. More like London, Debbie said, a look of disgust displayed clearly on her face. That's not good, Ashlyn said. What, the city, or the fact that London may look like this someday? Debbie said. Could you shut up about London for a second? Ashlyn said before letting out a sigh. I can't track the entity to assimilate it because it's everywhere. Wait, so you're telling me that all of this is one entity? I asked. Yeah, and I don't know about you, but I'm not assimilating an entire city. Or, in this case, probably the whole world. And before you ask, no, I wouldn't be able to in the first place, she said. That answered the next question I was going to ask. So what do you think? This a bust? Debbie asked. I think it is. We should probably head back, Ashlyn said. Cool. Let's go, Debbie said, turning back only to go silent. Ashlyn and I turned back as well to see a man standing at the end of the hallway. Red tubes, the same color as the flesh outside, were connected to him at various parts of his back as they dangled from a hole in the ceiling. This can't be good, I said. The man suddenly charged towards us with a blank expression on his face. I pulled the slide back on the gun and aimed. Take the shot, Debbie yelled. Hold on, I said. I had never shot a gun before, so I knew my aim wasn't going to be great. I needed him to be close enough that I wouldn't miss. When he was about 10 feet away, I took my chance and aimed for his head. My heart palpitated for a moment as I pulled the trigger, my hand recoiling from the blast and my ears ringing from the sound. I blinked from the muzzle flash, and the next thing I knew, the man was falling to the ground. He hit hard, sliding to the ground and stopping just before my feet. An exit wound was open in the back of his head. Nice shot, but next time, tell us you're gonna wait until you have a clear shot. I was about to jump in front of you and swing with my bat, Debbie said. The tubes connected to the man began to jostle violently before disconnecting and shooting back and up into the hole it came from. Something's telling me that we shouldn't go that way, Ashlyn said. Let's see if we can find an alternate path back then. Debbie, you still have the map? I asked. Yeah, give me a moment, she said, pulling it out of her inner coat pocket. She took a moment to study it. Okay. Unfortunately, I don't see any short way back. We're gonna have to go around the rest of the building to get back to the conference room, Debbie said. Alright, well let's keep going, I said. We ventured further down the way we were going. The whole building was littered with holes that led to the outside, and every view of the outside was just as nightmarish as the last one. One view we saw had a giant humanoid figure melded into the side of a building. Different intestines were feeding in and out of it. We made it to the other side of the building, halfway to the conference room on the map, when our way forward became blocked by a mound of flesh consisting of eyes of various sizes, arms and legs sticking out in every direction, rows of teeth and other things that I couldn't even describe if I tried. Alright, I'm officially done with this world. What the fuck is that? I mean, seriously, Debbie asked. Wait a minute. There's something coming, Ashlyn said as she turned around. I looked around for a place to hide, but there wasn't anywhere to go. Alright, nowhere to go, so get ready to fight, I said. I readied my gun. Debbie held up her bat. Ashlyn got her fists ready. A couple seconds later, I could hear footsteps coming from around the hallway we just came from. Here we go, Ashlyn said. We were ready for the worst, but what we weren't expecting was people in gas masks and special suits holding flamethrowers. There were 5 of them, and they stopped when they saw us. They all looked at each other, I assume in confusion. The one in front pointed their flamethrower towards us. "How did you get here?" they asked. The voice sounded female, but it was muffled enough that I couldn't quite tell. We looked at each other, realizing our answer was going to sound stupid. "From a TV screen?" Debbie said. The one in front lowered their flamethrower as all of them seemed to relax and look at each other. "VHS tape?" the one in front asked. "Yes," Ashlyn said. "Is it still open?" a different one asked. "It should be," I said. They all started walking towards us. "Where is it? Is it still in the conference room?" the one in front asked. "Yeah," Debbie said. "Full steam ahead, boys. We're going home," the one in front said. They ran past us with their flamethrowers out and lit the mound on fire. Loud moaning and screaming came from the mound as a couple of them grabbed fire axes from their backpacks and started chopping away at it until enough was out of the way from us to get through. Once we were through, we all heard a low, deep groan come from all around us. "Shit. We've woken the hive," one of them said. "Just keep going. We've got our ticket out of here," the one in front said. Suddenly, red tendrils started coming out of the walls and the floors towards us, but the flamethrowers were keeping them at bay. Other people like the man before would come out of the hallways to chase after us. I took a couple shots at them, but the people in a gas mask turned around and used their flamethrowers on them. We rounded another corner and saw the broken windows of the conference room. "Home stretch," the one in front said. "Wait, let me take the lead," Debbie yelled as she sprinted in front and through the broken window. "Scott, get ready on the kill switch," Debbie yelled. We all ran into the room and saw the TV screen was still on. "Freedom," the one in front yelled as they dived through the screen. One by one, we all quickly jumped through, with Ashlyn being the last one. "Scott, now," Debbie yelled. I glanced at the screen to see several people connected by tubes run towards the screen before the power cut. I crawled over to the VCR and pulled the power plug out of the wall just in case. "Turning power back on," Scott said. The lights of the room came back on and I saw Scott, Ashlyn, Debbie, and the 5 people in the gas masks. The 5 looked around, seemingly confused by their surroundings. The one that was in front took their mask off and took in a deep breath of air. They were a woman, maybe in her mid to late 40s. They all took off their masks to reveal 3 men and 1 other woman. "What is this place?" the first woman said. "My house. I know you're going to have a lot of questions, so just get them out now," I said, laying back down on the floor, still a little out of breath. "Your house? What do you mean?" she asked. "I mean, this is my house. You're from the Dark Moth Corporation, right?" I asked. "How did you know that? How did you get that tape?" she asked. 1, I have a couple Dark Moth tapes. 2, I collect cursed tapes, and this one just showed up in my P.O. box. And 3, I don't really know anything about the Dark Moth Corporation, other than it ceased to exist in 2005 for reasons I don't know," I said, holding up 3 fingers. The woman looked around for a second. "Well, that explains why no one came to get us. We've been stuck in there for almost 16 years, I think." "I lost count a couple years in," the woman said. "It's 2021. Any other questions?" I asked. "Do any of you have a landline or a cell phone I can borrow?" she said. Scott reached into his pocket and unlocked his phone and gave it to her. She looked confused for a second. "It's a smartphone. Think of it like a small pocket computer," he said. "And yet you guys still use tapes?" she asked. I let out a sigh. Debbie went up to one of the men and crouched down in front of them. Hey, just out of curiosity, you can see me, right? She asked. Yeah, why? He asked. He took a closer look at her, then saw her hands. You're an Invis, aren't you? He asked. I haven't heard that term before, she said. You came from that tunnel in Pennsylvania, right? He asked. Okay, yes, I am, she said. Are Invis widespread knowledge now? He asked. No. I was just wondering how you were able to see me, she said. It's been a couple days since then. The 5 of them managed to get in contact with someone, and they were taken back to wherever they were before, or something. I don't know. They weren't able to tell me. They didn't take any of the Dark Moth tapes from me, or any tapes from me for that matter. So the hunt is still on to find one last entity for Ashlyn, but it was nice to actually be able to save someone for once. To those of you who are wondering, I did talk to Debbie about how likely it would be for Helena to come back as a magician, and she doesn't know. She knows that it doesn't happen to everyone, and it wasn't likely that she would come back as one. I have a hardwood safe filled with cursed VHS tapes that are to never be watched by anyone ever, only because I have watched them and have faced and or witnessed the consequences. This post is a warning for the following VHS tape known as 8 Eyes. There might not be any more copies, but just in case, read this. This tape is a level 5. The name of the tape is 8 Eyes, and it's on a blank TDK tape. There is no runtime. Securing the tape is mandatory. Keep it in a hardwood box with no metal hinges. Metal only amplifies the energy of the tapes. Do not destroy. I know I usually say contain or destroy level 5s, but in this case, I think destroying it would be the worst thing to do. This is another tape from Carthen, and it was delivered to my door with a note. Hello, Valen. I'm sorry to hear about your recent loss. I have sent you a tape that I know was a higher level entity in it for Ashlyn. Hopefully it should be enough to get the job done. I have not watched it myself, but I can tell there is something on it just by holding it. I hope it helps. Carthen. There was also a note specifically for Debbie that I gave to her. That weekend I got the watch party together. Debbie sat next to me with her bat. Scott was in the watchroom with his machete, and Ashlyn stood leaning against the wall. Story still hasn't contacted me at this point. I'm not sure he ever will. Knowing that this tape was going to have a higher level entity, we all got ready for a fight. What we weren't ready for was the VCR exploding. When I placed the tape in and pressed play, it made its usual wind-up sound, but it didn't stop. It just kept getting louder. I took a few steps back as Ashlyn moved in front of me. A light emanated from the inside of the VCR as it began shaking in place until it finally burst open. The top of the VCR came off and different pieces from the inside scattered around the room. The room went silent for a few seconds. So, did something get out? Debbie asked. I don't know, I said. Something got out, but I can't sense it, Ashlyn said. You can't sense it? What do you mean you can't sense it? Debbie asked. That means whatever was in that tape is able to cloak the energy it gives off, Ashlyn said. The ceiling suddenly creaked above us as we all looked up. Ashlyn motioned us to get to the corner of the room. Scott, Debbie, and I slowly moved over next to the door and watched as Ashlyn took off her coat, then began transforming. The rocky protrusions bulged from her arms, and the black and white tubes slid from them, and the exhaust pipes crept out the top of her back. In an instant, 8 appendages came crashing through around her as the ceiling came down. Dust was scattered everywhere, and Scott, Debbie, and I were sent back against the wall as the sound of crashing filled the room. One after another, each wall of the room fell as the world around us began to chant. When the dust settled, we found ourselves in a large chamber covered in spider webs. My attention was shifted back to the middle of the room as Ashlyn was now fully transformed. being much taller with her skin being multiple bright and vivid colors. Sharp spikes sticking out of the sides of her legs, her shoulder blades stretched out and over her shoulders and fused just above her chest. She had multiple holes in her torso, too. She stood there with cuts on her arms and legs. A few feet from her was a woman, about the same height as Ashlyn, in a black dress, with 8 spider-like arms sticking out of her back. Her dark red hair was pulled back to show 2 large red eyes with 6 smaller ones centered around the other 2. After being trapped in that thing for so long, you'd think it would just be some normal humans I could feed on to release me. But no, it just had to be another Torpatoa. The spider lady said. Doesn't matter to me. I'm just going to assimilate you the same as every other entity I've come across, Ashlyn said. I forgot that when she's in her other form, her voice sounds like 10 voices speaking together while being run through light audio compression. Oh, really? The spider lady said as she started walking around her. Then I guess it really is a dog-eat-dog world out there, isn't it? Tell you what, you want to try to eat me, and I'll try to eat you. That sound fair? Are you trying to fuck me or fight me? I'm getting mixed signals, Ashlyn asked. I suddenly heard a crunching sound next to me. Yeah, get to fighting already. Debbie yelled as she ate some popcorn. Where the fuck did you get popcorn? I asked. I kept it in storage, just in case. Do you want some? She asked, pointing the bag to me. No, I'm good, I said. I'll take some, Scott said. The spider lady glanced over at us, then back at Ashlyn. Wow, I must have been in that tape too long. I didn't even notice your little posse over there, she said. Screw this. I'm done talking. Ashlyn said as she sent mini arm tubes in her direction. The spider lady acted quick, using 4 of her spider legs to block, but Ashlyn just wrapped her tubes around them. The spider lady used that to her advantage, however. The woman, who we will just be calling Spider from here on out, pulled the 4 legs back, yanking Ashlyn towards her. She used 2 other legs and hit simultaneously into Ashlyn's face and torso, knocking her on her back while Spider used the last 2 legs to somehow cut all of the tubes that she was holding on to. Ashlyn let out a distorted scream as what remained of the tubes slinked back into her arms. Blood leaked out from the protrusions. How unfortunate. That looked like it really hurt, Spider mocked. Ashlyn got up as quick as she could, then let out a pained yell as more spikes grew out of her shoulders and on the knuckles of her hands. Ooh, more spikes. Definitely the berserker type, aren't you? Spider teased. Ashlyn didn't say anything back. She just yelled as she charged at her. You could feel the footsteps rumble the ground underneath her as she ran. Spider shook off the broken tubes, then sent 2 more legs straight towards her torso and face again. This time, Ashlyn was able to block the blow to her face, but let it hit her torso, right into one of the holes. A red tube quickly shot out and enveloped the leg, spreading all the way up to where it connected on her back. Spider jumped back, letting her leg rip off as she grunted in pain. The tube pulled back into Ashlyn's torso, taking the leg with it. You bitch, that was my good leg, Spider yelled. Ashlyn just yelled again before diving into the ground through her black mist. Disappearing act, huh? Spider said. Ashlyn suddenly popped out of the ground right behind her, but Spider must have sensed it and spun around to attack. Ashlyn was just as quick on her feet and grabbed another leg and used her momentum to rip it off and swing it around to uppercut Spider, knocking her to the ground. Ashlyn used another red tube to consume that leg too. Spider used her remaining legs to crawl her body backwards, just enough to where she could get back onto her 2 feet. At this point, her back was to us and I could see a purplish blood leaking from her back. Ashlyn once again began charging towards Spider, but seemingly out of nowhere, 2 of Spider's legs split open, revealing sharp bone-like blades that she swung up at Ashlyn, cutting both of her arms off. I'm guessing she thought that would stop her, but Ashlyn kept running the last few feet before sinking her teeth into Spider's neck. Spider stood there for a second, only to use the bone blades to stab into Ashlyn's back. I saw Ashlyn's eyes widen for a second before they turned completely dark red. Several red tubes shot through Spider's body before inverting and spreading around the outside of her body. Ashlyn used her last 2 red tubes to pick up her own arms and used the knuckle spikes to stab into the top of Spider's back. Ashlyn's torso opened up before pulling Spider in, including Ashlyn's own arms. Once the last of Spider's legs were pulled in, Ashlyn's torso closed. Ashlyn stood there for a second before raising her head up and screaming at the top of her lungs. I had to cover my ears to make sure my eardrums wouldn't explode. Her arms suddenly exploded out of that open hole in her shoulder as she grabbed the top of her head. The whole room started shaking as cracks started to form in the air. Whatever reality we were in was collapsing. Lights beamed through these cracks as a red light shot out of Ashlyn's eyes like LED headlights. All of a sudden, there was one final bright flash of light, and then we were back in the watch room. Scott threw up next to me as Debbie and I stood there covering our ears. I looked around for a second, then I saw Ashlyn on the floor of the watch room unconscious, back in her normal form. "Ashlyn?" I yelled as I ran over to her and crouched down next to her. With one of her t-shirt sleeves ripped off, I saw that her arm had a large, fresh scar where it met the shoulder. "Ashlyn, are you okay?" I said, but she didn't respond. I checked for a pulse, but I couldn't feel anything. "I'm not getting a pulse," I said, looking back at Debbie. "Maybe she doesn't have one," Debbie said. "Fuck. Debbie, wait here. I'll be right back," I said as I got up and left the room. I ran into the kitchen and started searching through all of the drawers until I found my first aid kit and ran back into the watch room. Scott was still dry heaving, but Debbie was kneeling next to Ashlyn. I slid on my knees and stopped next to Ashlyn, then grabbed a smelling salt out of the first aid kit. I cracked it open and held it under her nose, but nothing happened. "It's not working," Debbie said. I held it under for a few more seconds before I tossed the salt against the wall. The only thing I could think of to do next was CPR. So I started pushing on her chest just above her heart. I bent down to give her mouth to mouth, then went back to pushing on her chest, but nothing was working. "God damn it, Ashlyn. I did not come all this way just to have you die on me," I yelled as I slammed her chest. Suddenly, Ashlyn's eyes opened as she jolted upward, taking a giant breath of air. "Holy shit. What the fuck just happened?" Ashlyn said, looking around the room, then met eyes with me. "I'm not in your head. I'm not in your head," she said as she quickly stood up and lifted me up to hug me tightly. "I'm not in your head," she yelled with joy. Ashlyn is still recovering from the fight with Spider, but she is, in fact, out of my head. She'll be staying with me until we can figure out how to get her back on her own feet. My VCR was destroyed when Spider came out of it, so I can't watch any more tapes until I get a new one. But I'm no longer going to watch them, period. I've come to realize that I probably shouldn't have done it in the first place, but I can finally say I'm done. If Story ever comes back, I'll make sure to update you guys on what happened to him. So this probably won't be the last time you hear from me, but this is definitely the last cursed tape. I hope. Either way, thank you to everyone who came along for the ride. Addendum. I woke up today to a loud knocking at my door. I looked at my clock and saw that it was 6:23 in the morning, so I wondered who it could have been. I got my slippers on and a blanket and began walking down the front door. I looked through the peephole, but all I could see was black clothing and white hair. Whoever it was really tall. I unlocked it and opened it. As soon as it was open, I was slapped across the face by something really hard. "That's for just standing there instead of helping me," a familiar voice said. I looked up and almost instantly cried as Helena stood there in front of me. She had on the same clothing that she died in, a long-sleeved shirt and jeans and boots, but they were all black now. Her skin and hair was a bright white, but her eyes remained the same dark blue color as before. Now, she stood a foot taller than me, closer to Ashlyn's height. I wasn't sure what to do, so I reached out and hugged her tightly, as I began to cry. She hugged me back as tears began streaming down her face as well. I heard someone running down the stairs. What the hell is going? Debbie cut herself off as she saw Helena standing in the doorway. Well, welcome back from the dead, Debbie said as she stood there in disbelief. Helena let go of me and whipped away her tears, then walked over to Debbie and slapped her as well, then hugged her tightly. Did you guys manage to free Ashlyn? Helena asked. We did, even though she did most of the heavy lifting, Debbie said, letting go of her. Well, is she here? Did she leave? What's up? Helena asked. She's upstairs recovering. It was a really bad fight, but she did manage to make it out. She'll stay with us for a while until she figures out how to start her life for herself. Or if Story has some sort of answer, if he ever comes back. Debbie said. Story's missing? Helena asked. He disappeared completely and won't respond to any form of communication, I said. Oh, great, Helena said. I'm sure he'll turn up again at some point. I've known him for years and this isn't the first time he's done it. It was really bad timing on his part, though, I said. Anyways, you're probably a little tired. Come with me. I'll brush you up on what happened in the last couple weeks. Like a weird world covered in flesh, Debbie said, taking Helena's hand. There was more flesh? Like more than London? Helena asked. Oh yeah, big time, Debbie said as they walked off into another room.